Humanity was on the verge of destruction when an evil god, Winddrake, appeared, leading a massive army of monsters. Chaos and death spread across the land as the monstrous horde charged forward, shaking the earth beneath them. Despite the overwhelming darkness, a glimmer of hope remained. The 5 strongest magicians stood together, ready to fight. As the battle began, Una unleashed his magic, striking down many creatures. Yet, more monsters of various kinds rushed toward them, their weapons drawn. The magicians, determined to resist, poured all their strength into their attacks. Among them, Sa stepped forward, focusing his energy on Winddrake, believing this battle would mark the end of the evil god. Pooling their power, the magicians combined 6 magical attributes into a single devastating attack. A tremendous explosion erupted, engulfing Winddrake. As the smoke cleared, the magicians anxiously watched, sweat dripping from their faces. But to their shock, the god remained standing, unaffected. Realizing their attacks had failed, the magicians prepared to strike again, but Setsena urged them to stop and observe. As they focused on Winddrake, he effortlessly avoided their magic, making it seem as though he had nullified their spells. With a menacing presence, he mocked the magicians, belittling their efforts as useless. Fear crept into their hearts as they realized their strongest spells had no effect. The battle continued with growing despair. One magician was struck and sent flying, while the others found themselves surrounded by countless monsters. Struggling against exhaustion, one magician called for help but was quickly captured. Another was swallowed by a monstrous creature, leaving only her legs visible. Una, horrified by the scene, desperately released more magic, trying to stop the advancing enemies. But before he could act, Winddrake appeared behind him, striking him down. Setsena fell to the ground, blood dripping from his mouth. Injured and barely able to move, he looked at the ruined city and his fallen comrades, despair filling his heart. Summoning the last of his strength, he pounded the ground in frustration. Winddrake loomed over him, declaring the battle pointless. But Setsena refused to give up. With one final effort, he rose and launched a powerful attack at the god's chest. Yet, Winddrake blocked the blow with ease, crossing his arms to stop the strike. As the dust settled, the magicians stood in silence, their hope fading. The battle against the evil god seemed impossible to win. Blue blood dripped from the enraged god's forearm where the blow had landed. Setsena stared at his fist in shock, unable to believe that such a weak attack had actually injured Winddrake. A sudden realization struck him. Defeating the god was possible, but the thought came too late. Winddrake looked at Setsena with amusement, unbothered by the wound. Meanwhile, Setsena noticed a faint glow from the necklace hanging around his neck. His mind flashed back to the day he received it from the head magister. As a child, he had held the necklace in his small hands, asking if it was truly the necklace of rebirth. The head magister, a wise man with long white hair and a beard, had calmly confirmed it. He had explained that the necklace carried the power of time and could correct past mistakes, but only once. At that time, Setsena had laughed, thinking he would never need such a thing. He had even questioned whether it was necessary. The head magister, proud of his brightest student, had simply smiled, saying that someday it would prove useful. He had placed a reassuring hand on Setsena's shoulder before ending the conversation. Now, standing in the ruins of battle, Setsena realized that moment had come. His mistake had been choosing the wrong magic at a crucial time. Gripping the necklace tightly, he felt a surge of energy. Determined to change fate, he activated its power. A bright flash engulfed him, and in an instant he found himself elsewhere. The intense sunlight forced him to shield his eyes. As his vision adjusted, he saw familiar surroundings. He was inside the grand halls of the Magic Academy, surrounded by students in matching uniforms. Confused, he looked around until he recognized someone. A young man sat behind him, smirking playfully before nudging his back. The realization struck. This was Leo, a friend who had disappeared long before Winddrake's arrival. Everything became clear. He had been sent 10 years into the past, back to the time when he was still a student at the academy. His heart pounded. This was his second chance. He clenched his fist, vowing that this time he would not fail. As he steadied himself, Leo reminded him of the reason they were here, the blessing ceremony. Setsuna walked forward with confidence toward the director and the senior magicians. Whispered conversations spread through the hall as students admired his talent. Some had heard rumors that he was gifted in all magical paths, a rarity in their world. A dignified man with a beard opened an ancient book, and the academy filled with swirling magical energy. Setsuna raised a hand to shield his eyes from the brilliant glow. Magic had many paths, and each required a specific technique to master. Choosing a path meant dedicating oneself to its study, much like how devotion to multiple gods was rare and difficult. The man with the book formally addressed Setsuna, indicating that it was time to choose his magical path. Normally, long-range magic would be the safest choice. It allowed a mage to create an element from mana and strike enemies from a distance, minimizing the risk of direct attacks. In most cases, this was enough to defeat an opponent. But this time, Setsuna knew that choice alone wouldn't be enough to stop Windrake. He needed something more. Setsuna became the most powerful user of long-range magic, yet it had been useless against the evil god. Remembering his past, he turned toward the sheet with the orange seal. The room fell silent as everyone watched him in disbelief. Leo, confused, wondered why Setsuna was hesitating. That morning he had been certain of his choice, but instead of long-range magic, Setsuna reached for close combat magic, the weakest and most forgotten of all paths. The instructor holding the ancient book frowned. This magic was only useful for enhancing physical strength and required fighting at close range. Against enemies who could attack from a distance, it was nearly useless. Choosing this path was like fighting archers with nothing but a stone axe. It seemed like Setsuna was throwing away his future. But Setsuna had already made up his mind. He knew how hopeless this path seemed, but it was the only way to defeat Windrake. He remembered the countless bodies left behind by the merciless god. Without hesitation, he pressed his wrist against the orange seal. A bright aura surrounded his hand, leaving behind a burning imprint of melee magic. He clenched his fist with determination. The room remained silent. The instructor shut his book with an irritated expression. He had been prepared to pass down all his knowledge if Setsuna had chosen long-range magic. Cyrus Elite, the leader of the long-range magic division, sighed in frustration. Setsuna had the potential to become the strongest mage, bringing fame to himself and his mentor. But Setsuna no longer cared about fame. He knew that humanity had only 10 years left before its downfall, and 5 years before the evil god appeared. As he walked down the steps, he thought about his past life. He had no experience in using melee magic, but he needed to learn quickly. The only question was how he would master it before the invasion began. After the ceremony, students were instructed to return to their classrooms. Setsuna searched the crowd, looking for Leo, but he was nowhere to be found. Unsure where the melee magic division was, he tried asking another student. The boy stepped back, uninterested in helping. Others whispered that Setsuna had ruined his future just to stand out. This was nothing like his past life. Left to figure things out on his own, he walked toward the courtyard, remembering that there was a map of the academy there. As he made his way, he suddenly heard someone yelling. A red-haired girl was struggling to stay on her feet, sliding backward from the impact of a fireball. She shouted angrily at the attacker, demanding the return of her brooch. The boy holding the green brooch smirked, commenting that it was a magical tool for storing mana. He and his friends mocked her, saying that someone like her didn't deserve it. Watching from a distance, Setsuna quickly understood the situation. The girl was a melee mage, while the 3 boys belonged to the long-range division. One of them, flames burning in his hands, challenged her to take the brooch by force, mocking the weakness of melee magic. He launched another fireball toward her, but she managed to dodge it. Melee magic focused on physical enhancement, increasing speed and strength. However, dodging alone was not enough. She couldn't close the distance between them. Refusing to back down, the girl summoned a glowing blue sword, ready to fight. The boys laughed, doubting her weapon would even reach them. One of them cast another spell, striking her down easily. She lay on the ground, unable to get close enough to attack. The fire mage prepared another spell, mocking her for being weak and powerless. 3 fireballs shot toward her, threatening to finish the fight. Before they could land, Setsuna dashed forward with incredible speed, weaving between the long-range mages. He grabbed the girl, pulling her to safety just in time. The boys watched in shock and anger. Holding the girl, Setsuna asked if she knew where the melee magic division was and if someone could lead him there. The long-range mages quickly recognized him. One pointed at the mark on his hand, realizing he was a melee mage. Another, grinning wickedly, summoned flames in his palm, eager to attack. They thought melee magic was weak, but Setsuna knew strength depended on how it was used. He had already noticed several things he could improve. Raising his right hand, he reminded himself that the path chosen did not always determine the outcome of a battle. The red-handed girl looked at Setsuna with concern, warning him that the upperclassmen were too strong and would overpower him. But before she could say more, one of the mages launched several fireballs in his direction, declaring that it was already too late. A blue aura covered Setsuna's legs as he focused his magic, strengthening them. With incredible speed, he dodged every fireball with ease. Moving freely, he realized that his agility gave him a major advantage. The long-range mage, frustrated by his inability to land a hit, grew angrier and prepared an even stronger spell. Remaining calm, Setsuna conjured an energy sword in his hand. As the powerful magic attack came toward him, he sliced through it, dispersing the energy completely. Shocked, the attacker couldn't understand how his magic had been neutralized so effortlessly. The red-haired girl, equally surprised, had never imagined magic could be cut like that. Setsuna knew that in any magical clash, the one with better control would win. His precise mastery over mana made him one of the strongest, even though his raw power wasn't particularly high. This ability proved more useful than he had expected, and combining it with his speed created new possibilities. Determined to turn the fight around, the furious mage decided to unleash an even greater spell. His companions hesitated, worried that pushing things too far would attract the instructors. Ignoring their warnings, he began chanting, summoning a massive amount of energy. Before he could complete the spell, Setsuna sprinted toward him at incredible speed. The mage barely had time to react as he watched his opponent close the distance in an instant. Gathering energy into his fist, Setsuna activated his skill, Fist of Magic, and delivered a powerful punch to his opponent's stomach. The mage collapsed to the ground, unable to continue fighting. The remaining students watched in shock. A melee mage, considered the weakest type, had won so easily. One of the defeated mage's friends hesitated before handing over the stolen brooch, realizing they had no choice. Lifting their fallen comrade, the group quickly retreated. Turning to the red-haired girl, Setsuna handed her the brooch. She held it tightly, overjoyed to have it back, and thanked him with a bright smile. Introducing herself as Layla Roseville, she eagerly extended her hand. Setsuna shook it, and she recognized his name, remembering the rumors about his unique affinity for all magical paths. She couldn't understand why someone with such rare talent would choose melee magic. Though he wanted to explain that his goal was to defeat the evil god, he knew no one would believe him. Instead, he asked her to guide him to the melee magic faculty. Layla, realizing that orientation had already begun, urged him to hurry. Together, they made their way toward the outskirts of the academy, where the melee magic division was located, far from the main campus due to its unpopularity. As they walked, Layla eagerly asked him to teach her how to create the magic blade he had used earlier. He explained that it was simply a matter of mana control. He understood that melee magic had many applications depending on how it was used. If he could master it completely, he would gain another advantage in fighting the evil god. A memory surfaced in his mind. He recalled sitting on a red sofa in front of the academy's principal. The man, deep in thought, removed his gloves and placed them on the table. Setsuna's eyes widened in disbelief as he noticed two different magical imprints on the principal's wrists. This was impossible. Each person could only follow one magical path. On his right hand was the mark of summoning magic, but the symbol on his left hand was unfamiliar. Confused, he had questioned the principal about the mysterious mark. The man had simply put his gloves back on, saying that he would reveal the truth when the time was right. But before he could ever explain, he had been killed soon after the evil god appeared. Setsuna still remembered the unease he felt upon sensing the principal's hidden power. If he could uncover that secret, he might be able to change fate. Back in the present, Layla pointed toward the academy gates, noticing something ahead. As they approached, Setsena saw a man with a displeased expression turning toward him. His teeth clenched in irritation as he scolded Setsena for wasting time instead of focusing on his studies. Layla tried to speak in his defense, but the man cut her off, uninterested in excuses. His glare fixed on Setsena as he declared that past achievements were meaningless here. Now that he had entered the melee magic faculty, he was considered worthless. Setsena removed the man's hand from his chest, questioning why someone who taught melee magic would speak so lowly of it. The professor's anger flared at the remark. Grabbing Setsena by the collar, he demanded to know how he dared to talk back. Despite the professor's hostility, Setsena remained firm in his belief that melee magic still had untapped potential. The professor, irritated by his confidence, considered putting him in his place. However, he let go and decided to test his abilities instead. He gestured toward a nearby training area where other students were gathered. A green-hailed student with glasses stood in front of a large black steel rock. Concentrating his mana, he swung his arms, releasing a burst of energy toward the rock. Despite his effort, there was no reaction. The professor explained that this was the first test to determine their ranks. Hidden inside the rock was a crystal, and their task was to extract it as quickly as possible. Turning back to the students, he warned that failure would result in punishment. Frustration filled the air as none of the students had made progress in over an hour. The green-hailed student wiped sweat from his face, leaning against the rock. No matter what they tried, the material was simply too strong. The girl beside Setsena scratched her head in frustration, unsure how she could break such a tough stone with her current magic abilities. Nearby, one of the students wiped sweat from his face, convinced that the professor's anger stemmed from being denied a promotion. Another student quickly warned him to be quiet, fearing that the professor might overhear. The professor, standing with a stern expression, motioned toward an unused stone, deciding it was time to demonstrate the true power of close combat magic. He set a strict time limit of 10 minutes, which made the students uneasy. Layla, feeling anxious, doubted that breaking the enormous black steel stone in such a short time was even possible. This one seemed much larger and denser than the others. However, the professor only grinned, unconcerned with their worries. Meanwhile, precious seconds continued to slip away. Without hesitation, Setsena placed a reassuring hand on Layla's shoulder and confidently stepped forward. The professor, gripping his watch tightly, taunted him, suggesting that an apology might earn him extra time. Setsena, remaining calm, refused, stating that he only needed 10 seconds. The professor's amusement quickly turned to irritation at such an absurd claim, while Layla worried that he was being reckless. The professor knew how strong the black steel was. Even with his experience, breaking it had taken him 30 minutes. He reminded Setsena that there would be no second chances. If he failed, there would be consequences. Still, Setsena remained undeterred, summoning blue energy around his hand. Determined to prove himself, he focused on his goal, becoming the best in the class in order to earn the principal's recognition. As he swung his magic sword, the blade connected with the stone, leaving only a small dent. The professor smirked, already convinced that Setsena's confidence had been nothing but empty talk. He began to consider what punishment would be fitting for a student who disrespected his teacher. Just then, a deep cracking sound echoed through the air. Pieces of the black steel began to break apart, scattering in different directions. The professor's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to pure disbelief. Setsena calmly held out the extracted crystal, reminding everyone that he had completed the task in exactly 10 seconds. Layla covered her mouth in shock, barely able to believe what she had just witnessed. The surrounding students murmured among themselves, struggling to understand how Setsena had managed to split such a massive boulder. Some even began to suspect that he might be stronger than the professor himself. The professor, now visibly angry, refused to accept the outcome. He insisted that there had to be some sort of trick involved. A stone of that density should have been impossible to destroy within 10 minutes, let alone 10 seconds. Pointing directly at Setsena, he demanded an explanation, certain that something was amiss. Rather than answering directly, Setsena simply questioned why a stone that supposedly took 10 minutes to break had shattered so quickly. If that were truly the case, perhaps the professor should reconsider his position and return to being a student instead. Furious, the professor clenched his fist, unable to contain his rage. Before he could react, a man with a lion tattoo on his shoulder stepped forward. Addressing the professor by name, he grabbed him by the head, questioning why he was harassing the students again. The professor, now visibly flustered, realized that the academy's head professor had arrived. The head professor stretched lazily, yawning as he complained about being disturbed from his rest. With a casual glance, he confirmed that Setsuna had not cheated. Instead, he had simply analyzed the mana flow within the stone and struck its weakest point. As he took a drag from his cigarette, he turned to the professor with a look of disdain, criticizing him for trying to act like a teacher without understanding such a basic principle. Professor Lionel called for the students' attention, preparing to demonstrate how to defend themselves using mana. Taking a firm stance, his body glowed with blue energy as he prepared to strike. He assured everyone that if Zachary had been properly trained, he wouldn't be seriously hurt. Panic filled Zachary's face as he stretched his hands forward, admitting his mistake and pleading for mercy. Without hesitation, Lionel delivered a powerful blow. Zachary attempted to block it with a magical barrier, but the force sent him crashing into a wall. Watching this unfold, Setsuna was astonished. Even after breaking through the barrier, Lionel's strength was unlike anything he had seen before. He couldn't help but wonder who this man really was. Turning to Setsuna, Lionel grinned and acknowledged his name. He gave him an approving pat on the back, impressed by his skills despite being new to close combat magic. Setsuna, however, remained serious. He was determined to prove that just because he specialized in melee magic, it didn't make him weaker than others. He intended to become the strongest by mastering its full potential. Lionel nodded in agreement, encouraging him to seek his guidance if needed. In his mind, he realized that Setsuna was another person who shared his own belief in melee magic's true power. While most students had already decided to participate in the upcoming competition, a surprising new contender had now emerged. With his hands on his hips, Lionel formally introduced himself as the head professor of the faculty. He welcomed the students but quickly got to the point. They needed to choose a representative for the exchange competition. Setsuna immediately recalled the significance of this event. It was a major tournament where 8 magic houses competed for honor and recognition. Only one student from each house was selected, and the champion gained high prestige. Before his regression, he had won the competition as a representative of the long-range magic house, earning the head magister's approval. This was an opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. As he stood there with his hands in his pockets, Setsuna's gaze fell upon fragments of black stone scattered at his feet. Lionel pointed out that someone else had already completed the same test before they arrived, and they had done it using only their fists. Curious, Setsuna looked around until he noticed a figure surrounded by a magical aura sitting in the corner. Recognizing him, Setsuna called out to Drago Ard, who approached with his hands in his pockets. Drago immediately questioned why Setsuna, someone capable of choosing any magical path, had settled on melee magic. Setsuna replied firmly that there were certain things he could only accomplish by mastering this discipline. Drago dismissed his answer, insisting that someone as weak as him could never achieve anything. His family had specialized in melee combat for generations, and he had spent 17 years training his body to reach peak condition. To prove his point, he threw an incredibly fast punch near Setsuna's head, the force creating a gust of wind that startled the surrounding students. Remaining unfazed, Setsuna stood his ground as Drago kept his stance after the strike. He then made it clear that he wouldn't allow someone who treated melee magic lightly to represent their house. If Setsuna wanted to prove himself, he would have to fight him. Hearing his name, Setsuna recalled that Drago had been the only noteworthy melee magic student in the past competition. He welcomed the challenge with a confident smile. Lionel stepped between them, placing a hand on their shoulders, pleased that they had reached an understanding. The duel would take place in 1 week. Drago turned to leave, but warned Setsuna not to think about backing out. If he truly considered himself a melee mage, then he had to fight and prove it with everything he had. The students murmured among themselves, debating who would win. Among them, one girl remained calm, stating that no matter how talented Setsuna was, he still had no chance against Drago. Layla watched Setsuna with concern, unsure if he could win the fight. He remained calm and admitted that in his current state, he couldn't. Drago's physical strength was far superior due to years of intense training, but he had a plan. With his hands in his pockets, he walked toward the academy gate. Layla followed, asking where he was going. They soon arrived at a secluded forest path, leading to a massive tree. Layla looked up in awe, wondering about their destination. Setsuna placed his hand on the tree, explaining that this was his secret training ground. A green aura surrounded him as he declared that training here would make him 3 times stronger. The tree was ancient, over 1,000 years old, and radiated a mysterious energy. Setsuna reached out, feeling a deep connection to it. He had discovered this place long before his regression, and now he intended to use its power again. The tree's sacred aura had the ability to restore mana, making it the perfect place to train without limits. As he clenched his fist, the green aura grew stronger. He was ready to push his body to its limits. Layla, watching with unease, knew that Drago was a natural-born melee fighter. She owed Setsuna for helping her, and now it was her turn to help him. Later, in the faculty's training room, Layla observed the students practicing. Her attention was drawn to Drago, who was effortlessly lifting a heavy barbell at an incredible speed. After putting it down, he approached Professor Lionel, asking if there were more black steel stones outside. Lionel was surprised. Was Drago really planning to destroy all of them? Without answering, Drago walked outside, picked up 5 black steel stones, placed them on his back, and started doing push-ups. He wasn't interested in destroying them. He was using them to train. Layla watched in shock, realizing the sheer power Drago possessed. A single strike from him could be deadly. She rushed off, worried about how the fight would unfold. Meanwhile, Setsuna sat beneath the sacred tree, calmly reading a martial arts book. Layla arrived, out of breath, and told him he had no time to relax. She described Drago's brutal training, but Setsuna remained unfazed. He had expected this. With his eyes glowing faintly blue, he reassured her that everything was going according to plan. Flipping through the book, he explained that strengthening the body with mana was all about controlling the nervous system. By focusing mana into specific areas, he could enhance different parts of his body. His legs for speed, his mind for memory, and so on. Once he mastered these techniques, he would need to put them into practice. Layla was amazed. She had never heard of such a method. But as she watched, Setsuna suddenly collapsed, catching himself with one arm before falling to the ground. His body was covered in wounds, a result of pushing himself too hard. Despite the pain, he stood up, his green aura flaring around him. His training was extreme, forcing his body to its limits. He needed to recover faster so he could continue growing stronger in the shortest time possible. Layla urged him to find a less harmful way, but he refused. Half measures wouldn't be enough to defeat Drago. His opponent had spent years refining his close combat skills. If he wanted to keep up, he had to push beyond his limits. Over the next week, Setsuna had to repeat the cycle of destruction and healing thousands of times. Layla watched in shock, knowing that just one session had left him exhausted. But for Setsuna, this was nothing new. His mind drifted back to his childhood at the orphanage, where he had no magic at all. Back then, he spent hours training, holding a book in one hand while stubbornly aiming his palm at a stone. Every day he practiced, failing repeatedly but refusing to give up. One day, steam rose from the small stone before it suddenly shattered into pieces. Though his progress was slow, he improved little by little. Now, standing with a calm smile, Setsuna knew this pain was necessary. It made him stronger. Layla trained alongside him, pushing herself through the same exercises. She had always been told that Setsuna was only gifted with talent, but watching him now, she realized how hard he worked. As he struggled through push-ups with 5 heavy rocks tied to his back, she saw the determination in his eyes. He wasn't relying on talent. He was pushing himself harder than anyone else. Finally, the day of the battle arrived. The arena was filled with students, all eager to witness the fight. Setsuna and Drago stood face to face, ready to prove themselves. Drago, surprised, had expected Setsuna to run away, but Setsuna stood tall, determined to win and become the faculty's representative. Professor Lionel raised his hand dramatically, signaling the start of the match. Setsena charged forward, launching a series of punches and kicks. Drago blocked every attack effortlessly, using his mana to shield himself. In return, Drago countered with a powerful punch. The force of the attack sent a gust of wind through the arena, making Layla flinch as she covered her face. As the dust settled, only the two fighters remained visible. The audience murmured, some believing the fight was already over. Setsena remained on guard, knowing that if even one of Drago's punches landed, he would lose instantly. Drago attacked again, landing multiple blows, but Setsena dodged each one. Frustrated, Drago questioned why Setsena was only defending. He took a firm stance, calling Setsena weak and claiming that this was all he could do. Layla, watching anxiously, wondered if all the training had been for nothing. Drago was still stronger. Lionel observed the fight with a calm expression. Though it seemed like Setsena was struggling, he knew otherwise. Every move was precise, each dodge calculated. Setsena wasn't just avoiding the attacks, he was countering them with perfect mana control. Drago, growing more furious, spoke of the struggles his family had endured. His father and ancestors had dedicated their lives to melee combat magic, yet they were always looked down upon. He had endured years of humiliation and was determined to change that. With anger in his eyes, Drago summoned a magic sword. He would prove his strength and earn respect with his own hands. Setsena, unfazed, created his own magic sword. The two fighters charged at each other, ready for the decisive clash. Drago launched an attack, but Setsena dodged and leaped into the air. Drago followed, chasing him mid-air before slamming into the ground with immense force. As the battlefield shook, Setsena recalled how people used to whisper behind his back, claiming he only chose melee combat to stand out. Now, he had a chance to prove otherwise. For a brief moment, he understood Drago's determination. They both wanted more than what they already had. Moving quickly around Drago, Setsena activated his skill Enhanced Speed and struck with force. Drago shielded himself with his arms, successfully blocking the attack. Layla watched with anticipation, wondering if the attack had worked. Lemuel, observing from the side, smirked. Drago was undeniably strong, but Setsena's control over mana and raw potential were on a different level. He was eager to see who would win. Setsena, sweating, realized Drago's defense was too strong. He needed a new approach. Just then, Drago swung his sword with full force, pouring all his mana into one decisive strike. The impact shattered the ground, sending cracks across the battlefield. Setsena turned, realizing he had been forced into a corner. Drago smirked, knowing there was no escape now. As he tensed his muscles and let out a fierce battle cry, Layla watched nervously, unsure of what was happening. Drago charged, throwing a powerful punch, but his attack passed right through Setsena. Confused, he realized he had hit nothing but an afterimage. Above him, Setsena hovered in mid-air. He had concentrated mana into a single point long enough to leave behind an illusion of himself. With his legs bent and sword raised, he knew this was his chance to finish the fight. He lunged forward and struck Drago in the stomach, landing a direct hit. Layla gasped in shock. Lionel, calmly smoking a cigarette, noted that Setsena had used his opponent's own aggression against him. Both fighters had shown skill, but the battle had reached its end. Lionel removed his cigarette, raised his hand, and announced the result. The winner was Setsena Cromwell. The crowd reacted with mixed emotions. Some cheered, others whispered among themselves. Setsena stood firmly, looking down at Drago, who was on his knees, holding his stomach. A nearby observer questioned whether Drago would be able to stand after such an attack. Drago, wincing in pain, admitted to himself that the strike had felt like more than just a simple blow. Setsena had altered the structure of his blade to avoid inflicting a fatal wound. Extending his hand to Drago, Setsena offered him help. Drago, still kneeling, had only one question. What was Setsena fighting for? After a moment of thought, Setsena answered. He fought so he would never lose, and so that no one could take anything from him. He would become stronger than anyone else. Drago smiled, accepting his defeat. He had underestimated Setsena, who had truly earned his victory. As Setsuna observed him, he realized that Drago's strength could be useful in future battles, especially in the fight against the evil god. Lionel stepped forward, addressing Setsuna. He had noticed that, despite his victory, Setsuna had struggled in pure close combat. With a satisfied expression, he raised Setsuna's hand and declared him their official representative. Later, standing before the towering white gates, Lionel informed Setsuna that it was time for the representatives of each faculty to meet before the competition. He reminded him to act appropriately, though he doubted it himself. Setsuna smirked as he pushed open the doors. Inside, the representatives of the other faculties turned their heads, watching him with curiosity. One student, adjusting his glasses, scoffed. Had a fighter from the so-called idiotic combat faculty really shown up? Setsuna willingly put himself in a difficult position, knowing the challenge ahead. He observed the guy with glasses, recognizing him as a representative of the enchantment magic faculty. The guy approached with arrogance, testing Setsuna's patience. He stepped on Setsuna's foot and poked his chest, boldly declaring himself as his first opponent. For the past 100 years, no one from the close combat magic faculty had ever won a match. It was a tradition of failure, and the guy with glasses made sure to remind Setsuna of it. He mocked their faculty, calling them muscle-headed fools who did nothing but train at the edge of the academy. However, before he could continue, something unexpected happened. Setsuna, remaining calm, stepped on his foot in return. He pointed out that people from the enchantment magic faculty seemed to have a strange way of greeting others. His words carried a sharp edge, but his expression remained steady. The guy glared at him in anger, calling him foolish. Setsuna, unfazed, made it clear that he didn't care about past defeats. This year, things would be different. The close combat magic faculty would win. The guy with glasses jumped back, frustrated, insisting that such a claim was ridiculous. Before the situation escalated further, the principal appeared. He acknowledged the students' passion, but reminded them that the real battle had yet to begin. Only during the competition would the true winner be determined. The students stood up, their expression shifting to excitement. Setsuna recognized this moment. It had happened exactly the same way in his past life. A girl with pink hair stepped forward, speaking with confidence. She expressed her honor in meeting the principal and promised to showcase her full strength. Setsuna identified her as Carol from the Sumner faculty. She was as friendly as he remembered, but he knew from experience that she was a fierce opponent. Their last battle had been intense, and he had barely won. This time, he needed to stay prepared. The principal addressed the group, congratulating them on being chosen as faculty representatives. He was pleased that 8 talented students had gathered for this event. With a thoughtful expression, he explained the format of the competition. It would be a series of one-on-one battles with opponents chosen randomly. The first match would be between close combat magic and enchantment magic. The second would feature healing magic against long-range magic. The third battle would see formation magic face summoning magic. The final match would be between special magic and alchemy magic. This event would serve as a practical lesson, allowing each department to demonstrate the power of their magic. The competition would begin in 10 days. Until then, students had to decide whether to focus on learning new magic or resting to conserve their strength. The principal was eager to see their determination. The students accepted his words with enthusiasm and showed their respect. Setsuna saw this as an opportunity. The principal was someone he couldn't normally speak to freely, but now was his chance. He called out to the departing principal, who stopped and acknowledged him. Introducing himself, Setsuna made a bold request. If he won the competition, he wanted the principal to teach him his magic. The principal hesitated, questioning why a close combat fighter would want to learn summoning magic. Before he could finish, Setsuna clarified that he was referring to a different type of magic. The principal's expression darkened. His arms became engulfed in a fiery aura as he demanded to know how Setsuna had learned of this secret. The sheer power of his mana was overwhelming, but Setsuna remained firm. This magic was his only hope in the battle against the evil god. He knew he would never get another chance like this. Without revealing too much, He explained that the victory of a close combat magic representative would change the way people saw magic itself. Surely, that was something the principal himself had hoped for. The two locked eyes for a long moment. Finally, the principal agreed. If Setsuna won, he would tell him about the second magic law. Setsuna placed his hand on his chest and bowed in gratitude. The principal warned him not to assume it would be easy. Setsuna, filled with confidence, assured him that he would succeed. The principal turned away with a small smile, satisfied with his determination. Later, Setsuna sat on a bench, eating a bun. After 10 long years, it felt good to experience school life again. He silently thanked Layla for recommending the snack. As he took a bite, he reminded himself that he had only 10 days to prepare. He needed to use this time wisely. Suddenly, a large fist came at him. Reacting quickly, he activated his aura, blocking the attack. Jumping back, he found himself face to face with a stone golem. The enchantment magic student adjusted his glasses, frustrated that his attack had been blocked. Setsuna dusted off his shoulder and questioned what magic had been used on the golem. The student clenched his fists, furious. He wasn't willing to wait for the competition. He wanted to settle things now. 4 more battle golems appeared behind him, standing ready for combat. Realizing that this fight could cause problems, the enchantment magic students hesitated. If others found out he was attacking Setsuna outside the competition, it would damage his reputation. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed the golems and walked away, warning Setsuna to be prepared for their official match. Setsuna observed him carefully. Controlling such a large number of golems required immense skill. His opponent was truly talented. However, his attention was soon drawn to his fallen bun on the ground. He sighed, disappointed. It was a shame to waste such a delicious treat. The next day, Lionel gathered the students. Smoking a cigarette, he announced that training would begin immediately. To start, they would analyze the fight between Drago and Setsuna. Looking at both of them, he asked if they understood their weaknesses. Both nodded in agreement. Lionel turned to Drago first, asking for his thoughts. Drago admitted that he had lost control of both his mana and his emotions. Una acknowledged that he lacked raw strength and often lost to Drago in direct clashes. Lionel encouraged him, explaining that recognizing weaknesses was the first step toward improvement. He decided to put them both through a training match to sharpen their skills. Layla, curious, asked if this would be useful for the competition. Lionel assured her that it would, assigning Una an opponent similar to Noel from the enchantment magic faculty. Since Noel could create multiple golems for attack and defense, Lionel designed the training match accordingly. Drago was instructed to act as several golems, attacking from different angles, while Una had to block and counter each strike. Drago, eager to prove himself, prepared his stance and charged forward. Una stood still, appearing calm and focused. As Drago approached at high speed, he swung his fist for a powerful strike. Una reacted swiftly, tilting his body just enough to dodge the attack. Drago, unfazed, immediately followed up with another punch. Una prepared to block, feeling confident. However, he noticed something strange. Drago was smiling. Realizing too late that something was off, he barely managed to stop a surprise attack from the opposite hand. Sweat formed on Una's forehead as he questioned whether his reflexes were too slow. Lionel observed from the side, noting that Drago had a good balance of speed and strength. He moved quickly, shifting his weight efficiently while closing the distance. Drago threw another punch, but Una dodged at the last moment. Predicting the next attack, Una expected a left hook but saw something unusual. Instead of the expected move, Drago feinted, aiming for a different strike. Lionel, pleased with Una's quick thinking, acknowledged that he had made the right decision. He advised him to dodge and counterattack. Taking the advice to heart, Una focused his energy into his legs and repositioned himself. As Drago swung again, Una swiftly avoided the hit and prepared his own attack. After an intense exchange, both fighters eventually found themselves lying on the ground, exhausted. Drago admitted it was a good fight. Lionel brought them water, satisfied with their progress. He assured them that at this rate, Una would soon be able to fight multiple golems at once. While drinking from his bottle, Una reflected on his performance. He realized that no matter how much he trained, it would mean nothing if he neglected his defense. Lionel, watching him closely, admired how quickly he learned. Though Drago had a solid grasp of close combat fundamentals, Una's natural instincts stood out. Days later, the long-awaited competition began. The Elridge Academy of Magic hosted its 781st faculty tournament, drawing in a large audience. The organizers stood before the crowd, introducing the event and questioning which of the 8 chosen representatives would emerge victorious. Una and Noel stepped into the arena, locking eyes. The organizer presented a betting table, inviting the spectators to place wagers. Close combat magic was so unpopular that betting against it seemed like an obvious choice. However, a student in the crowd loudly placed his bet on Una, surprising the others. They turned to see that it was Akthar from the long-range magic department. He seemed relaxed despite knowing that he might face the winner of this match later on. The organizer then explained the match conditions, which changed every round. This time, the battle would take place in a desert. Noel, clearly amused, saw this as a great advantage. The crowd cheered him on, encouraging him to crush his opponent into the sand. Some students mocked Una, considering him an easy opponent. Layla, irritated by their arrogance, shouted at them to wait and see who the real loser was. Lionel, standing nearby, tried to calm her down. As the battle was about to begin, Noel revealed a piece of rock in his hand. Una, remaining composed, recognized it as copper rock. Noel then threw it into the sand, explaining that this material was what his golems were made of. Using his magic, Noel summoned a massive golem from the desert sand. He confidently declared that he didn't need any additional weapons, his golems were more than enough. He then scattered several copper rocks across the battlefield, revealing his true strategy. By spreading the rocks, he ensured that he could summon an endless number of golems. In this terrain, he had unlimited resources. Layla, astonished by what she was witnessing, wondered how he could create so many golems at once. Noel, adjusting his glasses, stated that with this advantage, Una would never be able to reach him. The spectators began murmuring among themselves, believing that the fight had already been decided before it even started. They felt that Una had made a poor choice by relying on close combat. Feeling confident, Noel taunted Una, urging him to speak now if he had anything to say. However, Una remained calm, showing no sign of concern. Instead of reacting to the taunt, he simply remarked that the whole situation was uninteresting. He had expected something much more impressive from Noel. Noel became furious and immediately ordered his golems to attack. The golems rushed toward Una, kicking up a massive dust cloud that blocked the spectators' view. As the dust swirled around the battlefield, Noel laughed confidently, believing he had already won. The audience, unable to see anything, questioned what was happening. Inside the dust cloud, the golems launched powerful punches, further disturbing the ground. However, Una remained calm, summoning a mana sword and cutting through each golem as they attacked. As he advanced, broken pieces of golems fell around him. He knew his sword was sharp enough to cut even the toughest material. Noel, shocked by what he witnessed, struggled to believe his golems were being destroyed so easily. Una remained unfazed, observing the incoming golems. He knew that in close combat, speed and precision mattered more than sheer numbers. If his opponent relied only on summoning more golems without improving their strength, then he had no chance of losing. Moving swiftly between the creatures, Una cut each one down with a single strike. Finally, he leaped onto the last golem and drove his sword straight into its head, ending the battle. Noel, frustrated by the sudden shift in the fight, reached into his bag to retrieve more summoning stones. However, before he could react, Una had already closed the distance between them. In an instant, Una swung his fist, landing a powerful punch. The impact sent Noel flying backward, knocking his glasses off in the process. He hit the ground hard, sliding a few meters before coming to a stop. The audience, still unable to see through the dust cloud, was left confused. They eagerly waited for the dust to settle, unsure of the outcome. The organizer, watching closely, announced that the dust was beginning to clear. As visibility improved, the result of the fight became clear. Una had won. The organizer, momentarily stunned, confirmed his victory. Layla cheered with excitement, thrilled that Una had managed to win the battle. The spectators, still in disbelief, questioned how the close combat faculty could have achieved victory. It had been years since they had seen such a feat. Some speculated that Noelle simply ran out of energy, while others tried to downplay Una's win by calling it luck. One observer, deep in thought, analyzed the situation carefully. He suspected that summoning too many golems had exhausted Noelle, making him vulnerable. However, another experienced spectator disagreed, believing that Una's win was due to skill rather than luck. He became increasingly interested in Una's abilities, deciding that it was worth keeping an eye on him. The organizer then announced the start of the next battle. Layla, still excited from Una's match, gestured toward an empty seat and suggested that he watch the upcoming fight. Una, smiling, took the seat beside her, hoping to learn something useful from the next battle. His attention turned to Carol, a summoner, who was currently dominating the fight. Carol sat atop a massive summon beast that unleashed powerful magical blasts toward her opponent. The formation mage she was facing struggled to close the distance, but continued moving with incredible agility, dodging every attack. Watching closely, Una rested his chin on his hand, impressed by the formation mage's movements. He wondered if he could adapt some of those techniques for himself. Layla, observing alongside him, acknowledged that other forms of magic had their strengths. However, she remained committed to becoming stronger in close combat magic. Curious, Una asked why she had chosen this particular path when there were so many other magical disciplines available. Layla reflected on her past and shared her story. As a child, she had been playing in the forest with her younger brother when a wild bear suddenly attacked them. Just when she thought they were doomed, a melee mage appeared and saved them. That moment left a lasting impression on her, inspiring her to train in close combat magic so that she could one day protect others in the same way. Returning to the present, Layla wondered if her reason for choosing melee magic was childish. Una, however, reassured her that, as long as she followed her heart, she would continue to grow stronger. Feeling more confident, Layla smiled, appreciating his words. As they talked, they were interrupted by the arrival of Leo, a strong fighter from the long-range magic department. He had been watching Una's battle and was impressed by his skills. With a friendly demeanor, he acknowledged Una's strength and expressed his interest in seeing how he would fare in future fights. Leo then turned his attention to Layla, casually making a teasing remark. He made a small hand gesture while looking at Una, who simply observed with a neutral expression, unsure of what it meant. Layla's face turned red as she awkwardly denied any romantic connection, insisting that they were just friends. Embarrassed, she quickly walked away, saying she would leave them alone. Una turned back to Leo, surprised that he had not been chosen as the representative for his department. He had expected Leo to face Akthar, but somehow, Akthar had won instead. Lowering his head, Leo admitted that Akthar had used deceitful tactics to claim the spot. He warned Una to be cautious, as Akthar would do anything to secure a victory. Una's expression grew serious. If Akthar was truly someone who relied on tricks rather than skill, he would have to be extra careful during their fight. Meanwhile, in another part of the academy, a group of children chatted excitedly. Not far from them, Akthar opened a chest, examining its contents with a pleased smile. Shortly after, the organizer announced the start of the first match of the second round. The battle would be between the long-range and close combat departments, and the terrain was particularly dangerous. One wrong step could lead to immediate elimination. Drago and Professor Leono sat in the stands looking tense. Drago commented on how difficult it would be for a close-range fighter to even approach their opponent in such a setting. Leono agreed, noting that the battlefield strongly favored the long-range department. Akthar stood at the edge of the arena, studying the terrain. He wasn't concerned. The head of the long-range department had chosen an ideal setting for their representative, making victory almost certain. Nearby, Cyrus stood confidently with his hands on his belt, declaring that this was the perfect opportunity to teach Una a lesson. He intended to make Una regret ever choosing close combat magic. Akthar, eager for the match to begin, simply waited. The organizer, holding the microphone, announced that the fight should have already started. However, Una was nowhere to be seen. Growing concerned, the organizer called for him to enter the arena, warning that if he failed to show up within 5 minutes, he would be disqualified. The audience murmured in confusion, wondering what was going on. 10 minutes earlier, inside a restroom, Layla had approached a door and called out to Una. She asked how he was feeling, surprised that he wasn't already preparing for the match. Una, remaining calm, assured her that he was fine. However, he suddenly warned her not to touch a particular vase on the table. It was a magical item, designed to drain mana upon contact. Layla, puzzled, questioned why such a dangerous object was sitting there. Una, deep in thought, rested his chin on his hand. He explained that it was a trap, one of many that had been set for him. This was already the 7th one he had encountered. Setsuna was cautious, wondering if everything was truly fine. He had skillfully avoided every trap, convinced that Akthar was behind them. Since no evidence was left behind, he remained on guard. Suddenly, a loud noise from the door grabbed their attention. 3 small children entered the room. One of the children, a girl standing in the middle, carried a bouquet. She stepped forward and held it out for Setsuna. Layla bent down to examine it, curious if it was from them. A child pointed toward the corridor, explaining that a man had asked them to deliver it. Layla hesitated, considering that if it was from Setsuna's admirer, he would have given it himself. The child, smiling, added that the man was too embarrassed. Before anyone could react further, the girl holding the bouquet suddenly dropped it. She seemed confused, clutching her head as dark spots started forming on her neck. Sena immediately recognized those marks, recalling similar ones from his experiences during the war. Panic set in, and he kicked the bouquet away with force. Layla, still unaware of the danger, was bewildered by his reaction. Setsuna quickly identified the bouquet as a deadly plant, Venum, known for its poisonous properties. As the realization sank in, one of the children clung to Layla's skirt, coughing into his fist. Within moments, all 3 children collapsed to the floor. Setsuna was horrified at the thought that even innocent children were being dragged into such schemes. He clenched his teeth, knowing that if treatment didn't start immediately, the poison would cause irreversible damage. Finding a skilled healer capable of countering the poison would be a challenge. Layla, now fully aware of the seriousness, looked at him anxiously. Understanding the urgency, Setsuna warned Layla to stay back since the poison might spread through mere proximity. But Layla, determined, refused to step away. Gripping a brooch in her right hand, she took charge of the situation. Sana recognized the brooch. It was the magical artifact he had once helped her recover, capable of storing mana. As Layla focused, a green glow surrounded her, and she revealed that her mother had infused the brooch with healing mana for emergencies. Kneeling beside the children, Layla closed her eyes and activated the magic. Sena observed closely, noticing that the dark spots on the child's skin were beginning to fade. When Layla finally opened her eyes, she admitted that her mother had prepared her for a situation just like this. Sena, relieved, expressed his gratitude. Without wasting any more time, he grabbed the bouquet and ran off. He knew that during its blooming period, venom became even more toxic. Leaving it in a populated area would put others at risk. Enveloped in blue mana, he sprinted toward a massive tree, determined to dispose of the poisonous plant properly. With a powerful throw, he launched the bouquet into the air, summoning a sword of mana. With a sharp slash, he cut through the bouquet, ensuring it could no longer spread its poison. A green aura surrounded the tree as Setsuna, exhausted, collapsed to the ground, watching the results of his efforts. Meanwhile, in the arena, 2 observers discussed the absence of a competitor from the close combat faculty. They speculated that he had fled. The organizer, disappointed, was about to declare the opponent Akthar as the winner. However, before he could finish his announcement, a battered figure emerged. The crowd gasped as they saw Setsuna, his body covered in purple wounds. Despite his injuries, his determination remained unshaken. He refused to surrender, demanding his fight against Akthar. Amused, Akthar questioned how Setsuna intended to continue in such a weakened state. He mockingly referred to his previous attack as a gift for passing the first round, implying that Setsuna had willingly accepted it. Still catching his breath, Setsuna was disgusted by the way Akthar operated. The fact that innocent children had suffered due to his poison filled him with rage. However, Akthar feigned ignorance, tilting his head and acting unaware of any poison. His arrogance only fueled Setsuna's anger further. Akthar, with a crazed expression, dismissed the incident, claiming the children should feel honored to have served someone of his elite status. Hearing this, Setsuna's fury reached its peak. Clenching his fists, he prepared to strike. The referee, sensing the intensity in the air, immediately signaled the start of the second round. Akhtar stood ready as Setsuna, using his Storm Dance spell, dodged swiftly and charged forward, determined to put an end to this fight. Drago observed Liano with concern, noticing the unnatural state of Setsuna's mana. Anna, gripping his shoulder, realized that while the sacred tree had purified the venom poison, Setsuna had not fully cleansed it from his own body. As more projectiles came his way, Setsuna swiftly dodged each one. Akhtar relentlessly continued his attacks, determined not to give him a chance to recover. Setsuna had no choice but to keep moving, leaping between the islands to evade the assault. The referee, watching closely, was surprised to see a close combat fighter completely on the defensive. Cyrus, observing the battle with amusement, believed their preparation had paid off. While scanning the arena, Setsuna noticed the empty seat where Layla had been and hoped that the children were safe. Akhtar, preparing another spell, took note of his distraction and continued his attacks. Despite his exhaustion, Setsuna stood firm, waiting for the right moment to react. Some spectators whispered among themselves, doubting his chances against a ranged fighter. Akhtar, confident in his advantage, kept pushing him back, questioning whether he should simply surrender. Attempting to block another incoming spell, Setsuna focused his remaining mana on defense. However, to his shock, his mana ran out, and the attack struck him directly. Akhtar pointed at him, laughing loudly, seeing him weaken before his eyes. Smoke filled the battlefield as Setsuna struggled to stay on his feet. Akhtar, ready to finish things, hesitated for a moment. He hadn't expected the fight to last this long. Anna, standing amidst the smoke, recognized that Akhtar had fallen into a trap. Instead of keeping his distance, he had been lured into playing by Setsuna's rules. For all his arrogance, he had unknowingly given up his biggest advantage. Akhtar, annoyed by the realization, glanced around and saw that he had been isolated on a single, crumbling pillar of land. Leo, watching from a distance, was confused about how this had happened. Akhtar, wearing a crazed grin, reassured himself that taking unnecessary risks was never his style. He raised his hand, preparing a powerful spell known as Storm Cannon. Drago, frustrated by the unfolding battle, clenched his teeth while Liano remained calm. Akhtar, on the verge of completing his spell, was certain that this would end the fight. However, before he could unleash the attack, Layla suddenly appeared in the arena. She signaled to Setsuna, confirming that the children were safe. Holding up her amulet, she proved that her magic had worked. Relieved, Setsuna let out a breath, knowing that he could now focus entirely on the battle. His expression grew serious as he tightened his fist, preparing to fight back. Akhtar, caught off guard, couldn't understand how Setsuna had recovered so quickly. Setsuna, using his mana sword, activated his physical enhancement abilities. Throughout the fight, he had been gradually purging the poison from his body while destroying layers of land beneath Akhtar. Everything had gone exactly as he had planned. He called out Akhtar's cowardice, knowing that his opponent had relied too much on distance-based attacks. Akhtar, visibly irritated, refused to accept Setsuna's confidence. Cyrus, watching from the sidelines, agreed and urged Akhtar to finish him off. Akhtar completed his spell and launched it at Setsuna, convinced that he had no escape. With little mana left, Setsuna realized he had no option but to face the attack head-on. Summoning all his remaining strength, he took a defensive stance, sword in hand. As Akhtar's spell reached him, he endured the impact, bleeding from the force. Despite the pain, he redirected the attack, sending it hurtling back toward Akhtar. Akhtar, infuriated, braced himself to counter. He raised his hands and summoned another storm dance, believing he could nullify his own magic. Confident that Setsuna had run out of options, he declared the battle over. But before he could finish speaking, he realized too late that Setsuna was already closing in on him. Staring in disbelief, Akhtar was paralyzed with fear. Setsuna, now within striking range, launched his final attack. Akhtar, unable to react in time, was overwhelmed. The force of the blow sent him crashing to the ground, unconscious. The referee stepped forward, announcing Setsuna as the winner. Liano lit a cigar, satisfied with the outcome, while Drago acknowledged that Setsuna had handled the fight perfectly. However, before the victory could be fully celebrated, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath Setsuna began to crack. The island he stood on started collapsing. The spectators gasped in shock as both Setsuna and Akthar plunged downward, disappearing into the void below. Setsuna regained consciousness and realized the situation was dire. He channeled his remaining mana into his legs, reaching out to grab Akthar. Frustrated and confused about how things had escalated to this point, he struggled to stabilize himself. Before they could fall further, Carol summoned her creature Fenner to assist them. With its strength, they were pulled out of danger. Setsuna recognized the power of her summoning magic. The crowd erupted in cheers as they safely returned to the arena. Once they landed, Carol gently stroked Fenner, showing her appreciation. Akthar was taken away on a stretcher while Setsuna received medical treatment for his injuries. Carol observed him and acknowledged that she had believed he could handle the situation alone. However, Setsuna admitted that she had truly saved him. Carol, a strong contender in the tournament, had her own unique magic and fighting style. If she continued to advance, their match would be a tough challenge. Watching her alongside Fenner, Setsuna turned and walked away. The audience discussed the outcome, surprised by Setsuna's victory. Many had assumed his previous win was a fluke, but now they started to believe in his strength. If he kept winning, it would be a historic event. The director, seated in the stands, watched the match with satisfaction. Meanwhile, Cyrus, furious over Akthar's loss, muttered insults and swore he would not forget this defeat. Layla praised Setsuna's efforts, and Drago mentioned that she had told them about what had happened earlier. It had been a tough battle for him. Curious, Setsuna asked Layla about the children's condition. She assured him they were resting in the infirmary, and the doctor expected them to recover soon. Feeling relieved, he smiled. However, his expression quickly changed as he sensed a dark and menacing presence. Layla noticed his sudden shift in demeanor and asked if he was all right. He reassured her but remained deep in thought. A chilling aura, filled with an intent to kill, had momentarily surrounded him. He questioned what could cause such dark magic to appear in a tournament. Days later, during training, Setsuna examined his own fist after shattering a rock. With only a week left until the finals, he knew he needed something stronger to face whatever awaited him. That unknown presence still lingered in his mind. He had to prepare for it. His thoughts were interrupted when Liano arrived, responding to his request for advice. Setsuna addressed him by an old title, Comet Fist. Liano was surprised to hear that name again and wondered how Setsuna knew about it. Setsuna recalled stories from his past life about a legendary warrior known as Comet Fist, a close combat fighter capable of defeating dragons with a single strike. Although they had never met in battle, Setsuna had always admired him. Now he wanted to learn from him. Liano, lighting a cigar, questioned Setsuna's obsession with power. He pointed out that Setsuna was already strong. However, Setsuna looked at his hands, unsatisfied. His determination was unwavering. He wanted to be strong enough to win against any opponent, even a god. After a moment of silence, Liano chuckled. Normally, he wouldn't pass down this technique to someone still developing, but Setsuna intrigued him. Gathering mana into his fist, he demonstrated his skill. The sheer force of it shook the ground, sending debris flying in all directions. Setsuna shielded his face as the impact left a massive crater. Liano explained that the technique required an immense amount of mana and wasn't practical for long fights. However, one well-placed strike could end any battle. Setsuna was in awe of the power. Liano warned him that constant mana gathering made this move difficult to use in a tournament setting. Setsuna, still impressed, expressed his gratitude and said he would rely on him in the future. Without hesitation, he wanted to begin training immediately, ready to follow Liano's lead. Elsewhere, Carol sat in a quiet room sipping tea with an unfamiliar man. He congratulated her on reaching the finals. She smiled, expressing her gratitude. The man brought up her upcoming match against a melee fighter and asked how confident she was. After considering the question, she responded calmly, stating that victory depended on luck, but she would give her best effort. Standing up, she offered him another cup of tea. He politely declined, and she picked up the tea set before leaving. Once she was gone, the man pulled out a mysterious card, activating a hidden mark. A strange symbol appeared on Carol's neck, and she suddenly collapsed. He observed her, thinking that if she won, so be it. But if circumstances changed, he had no intention of letting her escape unscathed. Meanwhile, Setsuna continued his intense training, his fists aching from the relentless effort. Setsuna had been training relentlessly, determined to master the technique Liano had shown him. Within just a week, he had done what took Liano years, refining the skill into his own version, which he called the smashing bullet. Exhausted but satisfied, he clenched his fist, feeling the strength he had gained. Soon, the arena buzzed with excitement as the judge announced the final match of the 781st competition. Carol, a summoner, would face Setsuna, the unexpected contender from the melee faculty. Spectators debated who had the upper hand. Some insisted that Carol would win, while others had grown impressed by Setsuna's skills. Even the children from the infirmary had come to watch, cheering for him to give his best. To ensure the battle didn't cause unnecessary destruction, formation mages had set up a powerful barrier around the ruins of the temple, the designated battleground. Layla, sitting beside Liano, was pleased that the terrain wouldn't be a disadvantage for Setsuna this time. Liano, smoking a cigarette, agreed but remained cautious. As the fight was about to begin, Carol observed Setsuna and noted that he seemed to be in high spirits. Without hesitation, she raised her hand to summon Fenra, ready to fight at full strength. The judge signaled the start of the final match. Carol's summoned creature immediately unleashed a frost attack, covering the battlefield in ice and snow. Setsuna analyzed the situation. The attack was more of a blizzard than a simple ice spell. Carol wasn't giving him any chance to recover. He activated his tenfold physical boost, dodging Fenra's strikes and rushing forward. With a leap, he struck the creature using a mana-infused sword, landing a direct hit. Layla was momentarily excited, believing he had landed a decisive blow. But Liano pointed out that summoned creatures were formed from mana and could heal almost instantly. Carol quickly restored Fenra, proving her control over her summons. She acknowledged Setsuna's skill, but decided to escalate the battle. Raising her hand, she summoned a dense, icy mist that spread across the entire arena. Fenra howled as the cold intensified, freezing everything within the barrier. The freezing mana was powerful, but it remained contained by the magical boundary. Watching from the stands, an unknown man observed the transformation, realizing that Carol's ice-based attacks would be far more dangerous in this environment. Setsuna considered his options. A prolonged battle would work against him, and Carol's advantage in long-range combat made it difficult to close in. He decided that the best course of action was to finish the fight with his strongest technique, the smashing bullet. However, using it required time to charge, so he remained on the defensive, evading Carol's relentless attacks. The audience murmured that Setsuna seemed to be struggling. They suspected that a melee fighter couldn't stand a chance against a summoner. The children watching grew anxious, worried for him. Meanwhile, Liano, observing closely, realized what Setsuna was attempting. He needed time to gather enough mana for his final attack. Doing so in the middle of combat was incredibly difficult, but if anyone could pull it off, it was Setsuna. Carol wasn't willing to let him prepare. She summoned another powerful creature, Garda, causing shock among the spectators. Summoning multiple creatures required immense skill, proving just how talented she was. Both Fenra and Garda attacked Setsuna at once, forcing him into a corner. Layla watched anxiously as the fight escalated. Despite the overwhelming assault, Setsuna struck back with both hands, repelling the creatures. He acknowledged Carol's exceptional ability, knowing she still had a hidden trump card. Determined to turn the tide, he gathered mana into his fist, ready to unleash his smashing bullet. However, just as he prepared to attack, something unexpected happened. Carol suddenly screamed in pain as purple lightning crackled around her. Setsuna was stunned. This energy was eerily similar to a dark magic used by an ancient god. Carol clutched her head, and her summon stopped moving as if frozen by an unseen force. As he observed her closely, he realized that the mana radiating from her wasn't her own. It carried a sinister presence, one that reminded him of an evil deity from long ago. Confused, he tried to understand what was happening. Carol, struggling through the pain, raised her hand and summoned multiple creatures at once. The spectators gasped at the sheer number of monsters appearing before them. Even Liano recognized that something was wrong. This wasn't Carol's normal magic. The battle needed to be stopped immediately, and the barrier should be lowered before things got worse. But the protective formation remained intact, preventing any interference. Meanwhile, in the shadows, an unknown man stood beside a fallen figure. He revealed that only the creator of the barrier could disable it. Looking down at the unconscious mage beside him, he smirked, knowing that no one would be able to stop what was coming next. Setsuna dodged the relentless attacks of the summoned monsters, realizing that whoever controlled this mana had to be nearby. He needed to track its source while fending off the creatures. The unknown man, watching him, smirked, knowing that Setsuna wouldn't have time to search while fighting off the relentless beasts. Garda, one of Carol's summons, struck Setsuna, sending him crashing into a stone pillar that shattered on impact. The force of the blow sent him flying back, pain surging through his body. Layla watched in horror, calling out to him as he struggled to his knees, gripping his injured arm. The unknown man observed the battle with satisfaction, confident that Setsuna wouldn't last much longer. Tracking mana while fighting off multiple summons was nearly impossible. Carol, still trapped under an unknown force, was already nearing her limit. If this continued, her mana would spiral out of control, putting her life at risk. In the midst of the chaos, Carol, her expression filled with both fear and pain, suddenly shouted for Setsuna to escape. Her voice trembled, urging him to run before it was too late. This confirmed his suspicions. She was under someone's control, but he had no time to hesitate. The monsters lunged again, forcing him to dodge quickly. He grabbed one of the charging beasts and flipped it over himself before pressing forward. Meanwhile, Leano rushed through the arena stands, aware that Setsuna had likely used up most of his mana. He knew the situation was dire. If the fight wasn't stopped soon, Setsuna could lose, or worse, Carol could die. He needed to find the formation mage responsible for the barrier before it was too late. Just as he ran, a monster appeared behind him and struck, piercing his leg with its horn. Layla gasped in fear, watching Leano stumble. The crowd, witnessing the scene, murmured in concern. Some questioned whether this had gone too far. Setsuna collapsed onto the ground, his leg severely wounded. The unknown man sneered, knowing that Setsuna wouldn't be able to use his ultimate attack now. With a simple gesture, he commanded the monsters to finish him off. One of the creatures lunged, its fangs sinking into Setsuna's arm as he screamed in pain. Earlier, during training, Liano had asked his students what mattered most for melee fighters. While many believed it was about delivering strong blows or minimizing damage, he had taught them something even more crucial: fighting spirit, the will to strike no matter the situation. Now, back in the battle, Setsuna focused his remaining energy, channeling mana into his hand. He had succeeded in preparing his final attack. The unknown man was shocked, realizing that Setsuna had secretly been gathering mana in his other hand all along. Despite his injuries, he had managed to continue charging his strength. Setsuna analyzed the situation. The summons had gone berserk, but if he could force them into a specific position, he could take them all down in one move. The onlookers, Layla and Drago included, watched with anticipation as Setsuna unleashed his ultimate technique, the smashing bullet. He poured all of his remaining mana into the attack and released it in a powerful blast. The force of the blow sent Carol flying off Fenra while simultaneously eliminating the rest of the monsters. As she plummeted, Setsuna rushed to catch her, relieved to see that she was safe. He carefully laid her on the ground. The spectators, stunned by the outcome, began murmuring among themselves. This meant Carol had lost. The judge hesitated before officially announcing Setsuna as the winner. It had been nearly 100 years since someone from the melee faculty had claimed victory. Cheers erupted across the arena, as no one had ever witnessed such a powerful move before. Layla, in disbelief, asked if he had truly won. Drago grinned, confirming that the fight was over and everything was fine. A student who had bet on Setsuna's victory cheered, proud that he had believed in him. The unknown man, watching the result, admitted that he had underestimated Setsuna. Despite the overwhelming odds, he had survived. However, there was no use for the formation mage anymore. Just as he was about to cast a spell on the unconscious mage, he stopped himself, realizing that others had likely pinpointed the mage's location by now. With a flick of his fingers, he removed the controlling mark. Leone reached the area where the formation mage was supposed to be, but upon arrival, he found the mage unconscious. His heart sank. This situation was even worse than expected. After some time, the barrier was finally lifted, and the director stepped onto the battlefield. He acknowledged that Carol had taken a serious hit after her summons disappeared. Setsuna, still exhausted, shared his suspicion that her creatures had been controlled by an outside force. The director agreed, suggesting that some sort of magical device had been responsible. He assured Setsuna that the academy would handle the rest. The director then turned to him, recognizing his true strength and promising to keep his word. Setsuna, despite his exhaustion, felt a sense of triumph and gratitude. Before leaving, the director instructed him to meet him the following day. Later, in the medical ward, a healer worked on Setsuna, treating his external wounds. Though his internal injuries still needed time to heal, he was advised to rest. Just as he finished getting dressed, a knock came at the door. Layla, Drago, Liano, and the children entered, their faces filled with concern. Layla asked if he was okay. Setsuna reassured them, and seeing that he was doing well, they all sighed in relief, glad that he had made it through. Layla smiled brightly, happy that Setsuna was safe. She congratulated him again on his victory, feeling proud. Drago also praised him, saying he had become the pride of their faculty. The children looked up to him with admiration, calling him amazing. Setsuna watched them leave with a sense of warmth and satisfaction. After the door closed, Leono provided an update on the situation. The formation mage was still alive, but had been attacked and knocked unconscious. Carol needed more rest, but was otherwise fine. However, she would likely be questioned once she woke up. It was clear that both she and the formation mage had been targeted. Leono asked if Setsuna had any idea who was behind it all. Meanwhile, the unknown man approached Carol's room, but an invisible force stopped him. He realized it was a protective barrier meant to keep intruders out. Without hesitation, he destroyed it, calling it useless, and stepped inside. His goal was clear: eliminate Carol before dealing with any other loose ends. Gathering energy in his hand, he prepared to cast a spell, determined to erase any trace that could link back to him. Just as he was about to strike, Setsuna launched an attack, forcing him to stop. Setsuna had expected him to target Carol first. Standing protectively in front of her bed, he glared at the intruder. The unknown man, now revealed as Leo, smirked and let out a short laugh. He admitted that he hadn't expected to be caught, believing he had left no evidence behind. Setsuna, however, had been watching closely. There may not have been direct proof, but seeing Leo's actions firsthand had confirmed his suspicions. After a brief pause, Leo gestured toward the door, suggesting they continue their conversation outside, away from the smell of medicine. As they stepped outside, Setsuna felt the strain of his injuries. He hadn't fully recovered yet, and facing Leo in this state was risky. Leo turned to him, his expression unreadable, and asked how long Setsuna had suspected him. Setsuna answered that it had started when Leo disappeared after the blessing ceremony. Something had felt off, especially considering how Leo had lost his chance to represent his faculty. If Leo had played fairly, he wouldn't have lost to Akdar. Leo placed a hand on his face, impressed that Setsuna had pieced everything together. But now, it didn't matter. The final battle had made things clear. Leo's mana had reacted strangely, proving something was wrong. Leo's eyes narrowed, pretending not to understand, and stepped forward. Dark markings began to appear on his face as an eerie aura surrounded him. He asked Setsuna if he had ever heard of a great being. A sense of dread filled Setsuna. The transformation in Leo's mana confirmed his worst fear. Leo had become a follower of the evil god. There was no time to hesitate. He clenched his fist, gathering mana, and prepared to strike. Leo, now exuding a sinister presence, stated that he could no longer allow Setsuna to interfere. However, he admitted he had hoped to toy with him a little longer. Setsuna charged forward, wielding a sword made of mana. He swung at Leo, but the attack vanished before making contact. Shocked, he recalled a similar situation from the past. Leo smirked and explained that the great being had granted him the power to nullify mana. No matter how much Setsuna tried, his attacks would never reach him. But Setsuna wasn't ready to give up. He carefully observed the situation, realizing that Leo's nullification only worked upon contact. If he attacked from a blind spot, he might have a chance. He dashed behind Leo and struck again, but the result was the same. His attack disappeared before hitting its target. Leo, unimpressed, stated that his mana detection was faster than Setsuna's movements. Before Setsuna could react, Leo conjured a fireball and launched it at him. The attack hit Setsuna from behind, knocking him to the ground. Leo prepared another attack, stating that he had no real desire to fight. As Setsuna struggled to recover, he was thrown back once again, groaning from the pain. Leo continued walking toward him, acknowledging his impressive abilities. Most melee fighters never reach such a level. If Setsuna had chosen ranged magic instead, the fight might have lasted longer. Looking down on him, Leo decided it no longer mattered. He intended to end it right there. A bolt of lightning struck Setsuna's already injured leg, forcing him to his knees. Weakening, he tried to understand why Leo was doing this. Leo's expression turned wild as he spoke about his frustration with the world, comparing it to the urge to destroy something fragile. Setsuna, shocked, remembered their past and couldn't believe this was really Leo. He yelled at him to stop pretending, but Leo dismissed his words and prepared another attack. Setsuna knew he was too far away to use his mana blade and needed to get close fast. Remembering a past battle, he focused on recreating that decisive moment. He gathered mana into his fist, still believing he had a chance. Leo moved faster, casting spells at an incredible speed. It was clear that the power of the evil god was at work. Just before Leo's attack could land, another force interrupted the fight. A new magic struck down Leo's spell. Both fighters were caught off guard. A second attack came toward Leo, but he nullified it with a touch. Looking up, Setsuna saw a dragon and the headmaster standing nearby. The headmaster descended, apologizing for arriving late. Setsuna, relieved, assured him that he had arrived just in time. The headmaster turned his attention to Leo, suspecting him of interfering in the competition. Leo smirked, admitting he expected to be caught eventually. The headmaster had followed traces of mana to this point, confirming his suspicions. Regret filled his voice as he acknowledged that he never wanted to suspect his own students. But now, he had no choice. A powerful aura surrounded him as he declared his intent to detain Leo. Lowering his hand, he commanded the dragon to attack. A massive burst of fire shot toward Leo. Setsuna was overwhelmed by the intensity, but Leo easily dispelled the attack. With a smug expression, he commented on the dragon's reputation, acknowledging its strength. He admitted that without the gift from the great being, he would have been in real danger. The headmaster realized that magic nullification was real. Setsuna asked if he had known about it before. The headmaster explained that he had read about it in the archives of his family's Silver Rock house. Records stated that whenever dark forces awakened and chaos spread, magic nullification would be a key ability. Leo, now fully charged with mana, announced that magic would no longer work on him. He gathered energy in his hand, preparing a powerful attack. Setsuna recognized the magic of 3 elements combined, a dangerous technique. The headmaster, with a glowing sign in his eye, instructed Setsuna to move. Following his advice, Setsuna stepped aside just in time to avoid several projectiles. Leo watched in disbelief as the headmaster effortlessly dodged the incoming attacks. He questioned why he was surprised. Had he really thought his magic was the only one that mattered? Leo's aura grew more ominous. His power surged, and even Setsuna could feel the dark energy surrounding him. Determined to erase them completely, Leo unleashed another powerful attack. The headmaster quickly assessed the situation. If they fought at full strength here, the academy would be destroyed. With a silent signal, he urged Setsuna to leave. Then, casting a spell, he summoned ghostly butterflies that granted him wings. Rising into the air, he led the battle away from the academy grounds. Leo smirked, sensing that their battle had now truly begun. The dragon and the headmaster launched attacks, but Leo countered with overwhelming force. His power proved stronger, and the dragon was struck hard. Leo taunted the headmaster, asking if he was ready to surrender, and let his student take over. The headmaster remained calm, stating that his time might indeed be ending. Before Leo could react, Setsuna suddenly appeared behind the headmaster, charging forward at full speed. Leo was caught off guard, questioning whether Setsuna intended to hide behind the dragon. He activated a barrier, confident it would protect him. But Setsuna had anticipated this. Relying on his melee combat skills, he closed the distance and broke through the barrier with a single, powerful punch. Leo's expression shifted from confidence to shock. Setsuna increased his speed, striking again. This time, his attack bypassed the magic nullification, sending Leo flying. The headmaster observed the scene with satisfaction. Even magic nullification had its limits. It required time to activate. Setsuna had been fast enough to land his blow before Leo could react. Standing over Leo's fallen body, Setsuna confirmed what he had suspected. Speed had been the key to victory. With the battle over, he declared that the problem had finally been solved. Dana agreed, saying it was great, but they needed to tend to his wounds first. However, something unexpected happened. Leo suddenly stood up. He wiped the blood from his face, showing no signs of defeat. Instead, he admitted that he had learned a lot and was ready to continue. Setsuna was shocked. After taking such a powerful hit, Leo should not have been able to stand. Without hesitation, Leo prepared his next attack. Summoning a sword of mana, Setsuna attempted to block the incoming projectile. However, the force behind Leo's magic was far greater than he expected. His sword shattered on impact, and the blast sent him flying into a nearby wall. The impact was so strong that he struggled to stay conscious. Damon, seeing what happened, called out in concern. As his vision blurred, he caught sight of Leo, who explained that he had now mastered the combination of magic nullification and ranged attacks. Setsuna's strength was fading fast, and his mind drifted into the past. At the training grounds, he remembered a moment when he had perfectly hit the center of a target with his spell. Leo had been there, watching and praising his skills. Setsuna had laughed, feeling proud yet humbled. But that memory twisted into something darker. Leo's voice in the present grew eerie, and suddenly Setsuna saw a terrifying vision. He turned around and saw his friends falling one by one. Their lifeless bodies surrounded him. The weight of failure crushed him. He had lost again. Leo's voice taunted him, questioning why he hadn't saved the ones who believed in him. Then, a distant voice called his name. His surroundings faded, and he woke up drenched in sweat. Layla stood beside his bed, relief on her face. She informed him that he had been unconscious for 3 days in the academy's infirmary. Hearing this, dread filled his eyes. He gripped the pillow tightly, realizing what it meant. He had lost. Again. But there was no time to dwell on it. He immediately asked about the director. Layla told him that the director was most likely in his office. Without hesitation, Setsuna attempted to get out of bed. Layla protested, reminding him that he had not yet fully recovered. Determined, he dressed quickly, telling her he needed to speak with the director. Though worried, she could see that nothing she said would stop him. Setsuna placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, apologizing for leaving so suddenly. Then, he walked out of the room without looking back. Meanwhile, in the director's office, Darren spoke with the others, placing his trust in them. Lionel reminded everyone that it was time to focus on their tasks. Cyrus found it strange to be relied upon like this. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Setsuna burst into the office. Daeon was relieved to see Setsuna awake and in good health. Meanwhile, Cyrus watched him with a sharp gaze. Lionel approached Setsuna, placing a hand on his shoulder, and mentioned that he had heard about his loss. He suggested discussing it later, since Layla and Drago had been deeply worried about him. Lionel then left the room, and Setsuna quietly watched him go. Left alone with Daeon, Setsuna stepped forward and expressed regret for letting him down. He wanted to ask what had happened after he lost, but before he could continue, a sharp pain surged through his body. His wounds were still not fully healed, and the strain was too much. His vision darkened, and he collapsed. After Setsuna lost consciousness, Leo had looked up and then back at them. Though he wanted to finish them off, he realized he had used too much mana. Accepting his limits, he acknowledged that the battle had been entertaining. A portal appeared behind him, and with a slight bow, he stepped toward it, hinting that they would meet again. Damon watched cautiously, unwilling to let him escape so easily. However, as he looked into the portal, he noticed something staring back at him. A presence unlike anything he had seen before. A strange feeling settled in his chest, one that told him he needed to become stronger. Meanwhile, Setsuna, still recovering, had a similar realization. That presence beyond the portal felt oddly familiar. Damon remained silent for a moment before asking what he knew about it. Setsuna met his gaze, hesitating. The director urged him to share whatever he could. Those who experience defeat once often grow stronger, but those who face it twice carry deeper scars. As he prepared to speak, Daeon removed his glove, revealing a mysterious mark. He asked if Setsuna recognized it and if he would share what he knew. He wanted to trust him, but he needed to understand. Setsuna lowered his gaze, gripping his clothing as he struggled with his thoughts. He wasn't sure if the director would believe in something as impossible as time reversal, but then a thought struck him. He quickly asked Daeon to check the necklace of revival. Surprised, Daeon retrieved the amulet and examined it. The blessing of the spirit of time had vanished. That could only mean one thing. Someone in another timeline had used it. Setsuna pushed himself up, leaning on the table, and revealed the truth. 10 years from now, he had used the necklace because of the regrets he carried. Damon listened carefully, considering what this meant. If Setsuna was telling the truth, then in another timeline, he had been killed, and the evil god had destroyed the world. Though the claim was unbelievable, the power of the spirit of time would require immense regret to turn back an entire decade. That alone gave credibility to his words. Damon stood up and approached him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Until now, Setsuna had endured this fate alone, but that would change. From this moment on, he would no longer bear this burden by himself. He would have the director's full support. For the first time in a while, Setsuna felt a sense of relief. He was grateful to have someone who believed in him. Together, they would stand against the evil god and try to save the world from destruction. Determined, the director turned to him and decided to teach him a new kind of magic, one powerful enough to challenge their enemy, unlike traditional magical paths. This unique ability was called spiritual magic. Curious, Setsuna followed as Daeon led him to a familiar training ground beneath a large tree. A sense of nostalgia washed over him as he realized this was where he had trained before. Spiritual magic, Daeon explained, involved merging with a spirit by using mana as a catalyst, granting incredible power. Unlike other types of magic, it could be combined with different techniques, making it incredibly versatile. Setsuna listened intently, fascinated by the concept. As Daeon spoke, a spiritual aura surrounded him, and his eyes shimmered with an unusual glow. The sight reminded Setsuna of the battle with Leo. He had seen those eyes before. Then, to his surprise, Daeon casually raised his hand with 2 fingers up and suggested they play a game of rock, paper, scissors. Setsuna was puzzled, unsure what he meant. Daeon simply smiled, clenched his fist, and gestured for him to participate. Though confused, Setsuna followed along, choosing stone while Daeon chose paper. Daeon declared his victory and suggested playing again. They continued several more rounds, but he won every time. Setsuna, shaking his hands in frustration, realized he couldn't win. Daeon then revealed that this was due to an ability granted by the spirit of time, allowing him to glimpse a few seconds into the future. He explained that many spirits existed in the world, each granting unique abilities to those who formed contracts with them. A contract with the spirit of wind allowed a person to fly, while the spirit of water granted immunity to physical attacks. Hearing this, Setsuna was amazed. The idea of using such magic was almost beyond imagination. If he could learn it, his close combat abilities would improve significantly. However, before he could make a contract with a spirit, there was something he needed to do. Daeon smiled and announced that the time had come for him to try. Closing his eyes, he was soon surrounded by a bright aura. Setsuna watched in amazement as Daeon lifted his hand and instructed him to clear his mind and become one with nature. Spirits were everywhere, he just needed to sense them. Following his guidance, Setsuna closed his eyes and focused. He silently called out to the spirits, asking for their power to help him defeat the evil god. However, nothing happened. A sinking feeling crept over him. Was he truly incapable of sensing them? The director observed him closely and suggested that perhaps his natural impatience was interfering. Frustrated, Setsuna clenched his fist, unsure of what he was doing wrong. Daeon calmly explained that true connection with nature required inner peace. Instead of forcing it, he needed to simply feel it. Setsuna tried to push aside his distractions, but his mind kept returning to his losses, his determination to grow stronger, and the fear of failing again. Daeon placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, advising him not to rush. Even he had taken 3 years to master this ability, but he was confident that Setsuna would learn it in time to fight the evil god. Setsuna, however, was frustrated by the thought of waiting that long. He insisted that he needed to improve as quickly as possible, since no one knew when the apostles would strike again. Curious, Daeon asked which apostles he meant. Setsuna explained that they came from the same dimension as the evil god, and each possessed unique abilities separate from traditional magic. He was certain that Leo, who had used disintegration magic, was one of them. In his past life, he had fought an apostle before returning in time. Despite having an advantage with ranged magic, the battle had been incredibly difficult. Hearing this, Daeon recalled an ancient legend, the 12 Dark Forces. His family, the Silver Rock lineage, had known of them for generations. Setsuna agreed that if Leo was one of them, there were likely others hiding in their world. The director understood his concern, but reminded him that rushing would only lead to failure. A clear mind was essential for victory. An idea came to him. Perhaps their upcoming training in the dungeon would help. Setsuna, caught off guard, asked what training he meant. Daeon mentioned that Lionel would explain later, but the training would push them all beyond their limits. It would be a difficult test, but it would prepare them for the battles ahead. He advised Setsuna to rest first, as there was a surprise waiting for them in the dungeon. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Leo entered a vast hall where several unknown figures were gathered. Holding the back of his head in guilt, he admitted he was late. A monstrous figure glared at him with irritation, questioning whether he had the audacity to keep them waiting. Another figure, hanging from the ceiling, mocked him, wondering if he had even managed to eliminate a single student. Leo had been granted permission to act freely, yet he had failed. Worse, he had suffered injuries and fled the battle. The others demanded to know how he planned to take responsibility for his failure. The one on the ceiling, known as Pucker, laughed at him. Leo admitted that he had lost his composure when facing his best friend. Despite his calm demeanor, one of the apostles, Zane, was visibly annoyed by his attitude. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as they stared each other down. Sagan, the 10th Dark Apostle, was particularly furious and prepared to attack. Before things escalated, a commanding voice interrupted them, ordering them to stop. The unknown figure reminded them that they were apostles and should behave accordingly, as everything they did served a greater purpose. Turning to face them, he questioned why they still failed to understand this vision. The second Dark Apostle, Sadia, fixed them with a terrifying gaze. His aura alone pushed them back, making Leo realize just how powerful he was. Approaching them, Sadia announced that it was time to proceed with their plans. However, before he could continue, Sagan interrupted, pointing at Leo's failure. He demanded to know how they could trust him moving forward. Pucker, amused by the situation, offered to handle Leo himself, suggesting that it would be more entertaining that way. However, Sadia dismissed the idea. He had already made the necessary arrangements, and Leo would complete the task assigned to him. A few days later, back at the academy, Layla entered the classroom and was surprised to see Setsuna there. She asked if his wounds had healed enough for him to attend classes. He assured her that he was fine and could theoretically participate in lectures again. Layla, looking thoughtful, recalled that he had been injured once more after the finals. She wondered what had really happened. Setsuna, avoiding her gaze, remained silent. Damon decided that, for now, The existence of the evil god and his apostles should remain a secret from the general public. Only a few trusted professors would receive limited information. He planned to find Leo and focus on strengthening the academy's security. Because of this, the joint training and spiritual magic lessons were postponed. Setsuna apologized for causing trouble, but Damon assured him everything was fine. Despite this, Setsuna felt the urgency to recover quickly and grow stronger. Sitting quietly, he clenched his hands into fists, deep in thought. Lionel soon entered the room, instructing everyone to take their seats. He announced the details of an upcoming joint training session with the other houses. The previous competition had allowed students to observe different fighting styles, but this training was meant to push them beyond their limits and improve teamwork across different disciplines. The training would take place in a one-star dungeon, a dangerous location requiring careful selection of participants. Since the event was scheduled to start in 2 weeks, everyone needed to prepare thoroughly. Hearing this, Setsuna realized this must be the dungeon Damon had mentioned earlier. Determined to participate, he resolved to heal his injuries as soon as possible. Later, while walking through the streets, Setsuna and Layla talked about dinner. She eagerly suggested that they eat well to prepare for training. Amused by her enthusiasm, Setsuna agreed, and they headed off together. As they walked, passing students whispered about him. Some pointed in his direction, mentioning how impressive his performance in the competition had been, especially given his use of close combat magic. Further down the street, another group of students looked at him with admiration, with one girl even calling herself his fan. Layla found it ironic that these same people had looked down on him just days ago. Setsuna simply closed his eyes and nodded in agreement. Suddenly, 3 young men appeared in front of them. The blonde one, Carl, immediately addressed Setsuna, confirming that he was the fighter who used melee magic. Carl was from the Noble Salon, a group known for its elite members. Rumors suggested that he would join the army after graduation. Stepping forward with confidence, Carl extended an invitation for Setsuna to join the Noble Salon. When Setsuna hesitated, Carl proudly explained that the salon was exclusive to high-ranking noble mages. Typically, they did not accept melee fighters, but he was willing to make an exception for him. He believed that having Setsuna on their side would ensure their dominance over others. Excited whispers spread among the nearby students, with some finding it unbelievable that Carl was recruiting him. Setsuna considered the offer carefully. As the winner of the competition, forming strong connections could be beneficial. However, Carl's next words changed everything. He dismissively pointed at Layla, questioning why Setsuna was wasting his time with someone so unimportant. He warned that associating with her could ruin his future. Without hesitation, Setsuna closed his eyes, his expression calm. He rejected the offer without any concern, making it clear that he had no interest in joining. Carl and his companions were shocked by Setsuna's response. Carl, unwilling to accept rejection, asked him again. Instead of answering directly, Setsuna turned away, stating that noble bloodlines were meaningless and that Carl was the one wasting his time. Hearing these words from the competition's winner was a serious blow to Carl's reputation. Furious, he pulled out his chain weapon and activated his skill, preparing to attack. As Carl charged forward, anger evident in his movements, Layla quickly intervened, grabbing his arm before he could strike. She reminded them that fights like this were strictly forbidden at the academy. Carl, frustrated and in pain, dismissed her words, but his followers immediately ran up to check on him. He waved them away, ordering them to leave him alone. Layla, unfazed, made fun of them, while one of Carl's companions cautiously asked if he was injured. Annoyed, Carl silenced him, declaring that he would inform his father about what had happened before storming off. Layla let out a relieved breath, turning to Setsuna with a smile. Watching her, Setsuna noticed how much she had grown stronger. Just then, someone called out to him. Confused, he turned around to see Carol waving at him. He was glad to see that she had recovered. She approached them, expressing gratitude for his help, and nervously inviting him to her room. Layla, taken aback, could hardly believe what she had just heard. Later, in Carol's elegantly decorated room, she insisted on preparing a home-cooked meal as a way to thank Setsuna for saving her. As they settled in, she assured them that the food would be ready soon. Layla, eager to help, offered to assist in the kitchen, feeling that Carol shouldn't handle everything alone. Grateful, Carol accepted her help. As they prepared the food, Layla noticed the presence of medicinal herbs. Carol explained that they were making healing dishes. Meanwhile, Setsuna reflected on the past events, recalling how the principal had mentioned that Carol had no memory of the incident with Leo. Whether due to shock or something more mysterious, she seemed unaware of what had happened. Still, he was relieved that she was unharmed. However, the possibility remained that others could be targeted in the future. Drago, noticing Setsuna's serious expression, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He pointed out that Setsuna always took on too much alone and suggested that he should relax a little. Before Setsuna could respond, loud voices erupted from the kitchen. Carol seemed flustered, exclaiming that something was too much. Setsuna, curious, asked if everything was all right. Carol apologized and requested his help. Drago agreed to assist and soon found himself wearing an apron, much to his confusion. Carol explained that it was the only type she had. With everyone gathered, they finally began cooking. Setsuna watched the scene unfold with a smile. When the meal was finally ready, they set the table, and Carol invited everyone to eat. Layla, glancing at the overflowing dishes, admitted that they might have gone overboard. Setsuna, however, dismissed the thought, appreciating the effort they had put in. Determined to eat everything, he activated his physical enhancement magic to aid digestion before digging into the meal. Layla, noticing how much he was eating, asked if he was all right. He assured her that everything was fine, praising the egg soup for its rich flavor. Drago, pleased, revealed that he had prepared the soup and offered more. Setsuna happily accepted, expressing his gratitude. Carol, however, felt defeated, realizing that Drago had won their unspoken cooking competition. As Setsuna enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere, a thought crossed his mind. In his past life, moments like these had been taken away by the evil god. He silently vowed that this time he would not let history repeat itself. 2 weeks later, the day of joint training arrived. Students from different houses gathered, discussing their upcoming challenge. Drago checked in with Setsuna, who assured him that he was ready, crediting the healing food they had been preparing for him. Drago, smiling, told him it was nothing special and that it was all for the sake of their close combat magic house. Without the healing meals, the effects of his recovery might not have been as effective. Feeling reassured, Setsuna noted that this time he and Drago were on the same team, meaning he could trust him in battle. Soon an upperclassman approached them, introducing himself as One, a third-year student from the formation department. A girl standing next to him removed her hood and greeted them. She and Drago exchanged introductions, confirming they were from the close combat department. Une, appearing friendly, patted them on the shoulders and acknowledged Setsuna's reputation as the competition's winner. He suggested that they work together. Drago observed Une's lively personality and made a casual remark about it. However, as Une walked away, his companion quietly noted that he was skilled at lowering others' guard. Une smirked, suggesting that if that was the case, it was time to begin their real mission. At the entrance of the dungeon, Professor Giovanni Dellini, an instructor from the Formation Magic faculty, addressed the students. He announced that the joint training would be conducted between the Faculty of Pharmacy and the Faculty of Close Combat. The dungeon, known as the Ruins of the Sealed Demon, was a dangerous place, filled with ancient monsters and undead creatures. During the training, students would have to defeat these creatures in live combat. Their performance would be recorded using memory bracelets, and any loot collected from monsters would count as bonus points. Those who earned the highest points would receive Academy medals, and anyone who exceeded 100 points would gain the opportunity to train with the Royal Battalion. Hearing this, Setsuna's eyes lit up. The Royal Battalion consisted of the kingdom's strongest warriors, and in his past life, he had met many comrades there. If he could join again, perhaps he could reunite with them. Determined, he set his sights on achieving the required points. Giovanni distributed the bracelets and warned the students not to venture too far, as the dungeon's deeper areas remained unexplored. In case of emergencies, they could channel mana into the bracelet to teleport to safety. Setsuna resolved to reach the goal of 100 points, but Drago, just as ambitious, declared that he would aim for 200 points instead. Amused, Layla laughed at their competitive spirit while they exchanged surprised glances, Drago grinning. expressed excitement to see how Setsuna would perform. With the briefing complete, Giovanni signaled the start of the training. The students immediately rushed into the dungeon. As Setsuna ran down the hallway, he considered the risks ahead. The ruins were remnants of an ancient civilization, filled with hostile creatures that would attack any intruders. Even with teleportation magic, the training remained extremely dangerous. Drago pointed ahead, noting that the path was clear. Entering a large chamber, they were amazed by the underground space. Setsuna observed the presence of ancient plants, suggesting that the ruins might have once belonged to an advanced civilization. Remembering the principal's words, he suspected that this training was a necessary preparation for future missions. If so, he needed to master spiritual magic as soon as possible. Une and a few other students caught up, commenting on their speed. One of them pointed ahead, leading the group to a crossroad. The students debated which path to take. Some chose a seemingly safer route, while others leaned toward the riskier one. Une, eager for a challenge, confidently chose the more dangerous path. Setsuna agreed that their goal was to gather as many points as possible, making Une's choice reasonable. However, something felt off. While the others discussed, he walked toward a nearby wall and tapped it. The sound confirmed his suspicion. It was a hidden passage. Drago, surprised, asked if he was certain. Setsuna pointed out that the vegetation around it was unusual. Trusting his judgment, Drago struck the wall with a powerful punch, breaking it apart. A gust of wind rushed from the opening, revealing a hidden path. The group, now excited, ran through the secret passage, hoping to gain an advantage. As they moved forward, a massive boulder suddenly fell toward them. Reacting instantly, Drago activated his Mana Sword skill and destroyed the boulder with a single strike. Setsuna complimented his strength, while Drago explained that he wanted to prove that close combat magic was just as powerful as any other form. However, before they could continue, a bright light flashed behind Setsuna. He instinctively dodged as an arrow struck the wall beside him. Realizing they were under attack, Setsuna quickly located the source of the attack and rushed forward. With a precise strike, he shattered the magic circle that had generated the arrows. Drago watched in awe, realizing that Setsuna's reflexes and combat skills had reached a new level. Drago and his team were strategizing on how to make things easier for their third years. As they moved through the dungeon, they encountered a chest. Just as Drago was about to reach for it, a sudden burst of magic shot past him. A blue mark appeared above the chest before it suddenly vanished. Mifune had teleported the chest to himself and claimed the points. Determined to catch up, Drago and the others pushed forward. Suddenly, a wall began to collapse in front of Drago. Reacting quickly, he shattered it with a powerful punch, revealing another hidden chest. However, before he could claim it, another spell whisked it away. Once again, Mifune had stolen the chest and increased his lead. Drago, still without a single point, was left frustrated and confused. As the group advanced, they faced animated armor. Drago managed to sever one of the creature's arms with his sword, but before he could finish the battle, Mifune's teleportation magic activated again. He swiftly moved in, struck the creature, and secured more points. While Drago and Yuzuha continued to defeat more monsters, their scores remained far behind. At one point, Drago struggled to hold up a massive stone while Mifune took another chest and more points. As they all gathered in a single room, Drago was left exhausted, supported by Setsuna. Meanwhile, Mifune and Yuzuha looked back at them with confidence, knowing they were ahead. Drago's frustration grew as he realized the others were constantly outmaneuvering him. Setsuna questioned the strategy of taking points from their juniors, but Mifune only saw it as a part of the game. He had the advantage of teleportation magic, making it easy to take what he wanted. Yuzuha, on the other hand, seemed indifferent, her true motives unclear. As they pressed on, Mian led the way. Drago, deep in thought, noticed something unusual about the next room. Mifune, eager for more points, activated his teleportation spell and reached for the next chest. However, the moment he did, a dark energy began to seep from it. He barely had time to react before a powerful force knocked him backward. From within the chest, a monstrous skeletal figure with a menacing aura emerged. The sight filled the room with dread. The dungeon, originally thought to be of the lowest difficulty, now held something far more dangerous. Setsuna observed the creature and immediately realized that it was far more powerful than anything they had encountered before. He recognized the dark fire surrounding it and understood the true danger. This was the Death King. The energy it emitted was known to cause terrible nightmares. Without warning, the Death King let out a furious roar, angered by the disturbance, and declared that they would all perish. Drago, still focused on the competition, wondered how many points this powerful monster would be worth. However, before anyone could react, the Death King launched another attack directly at Mifune. Setsuna quickly moved to intercept the attack, shielding Mifune from harm. Meanwhile, Drago charged toward the monster, but just as he was about to strike, he was caught off guard by a sudden magical trap. Symbols appeared all around him, revealing that the Death King had placed magic circles throughout the battlefield. If Drago had not protected himself with mana, the trap could have ended the fight for him instantly. The Death King raised his hand once more, preparing another powerful attack. Magic circles filled the room, glowing ominously. Seinon analyzed the situation and realized that the monster's intelligence and magic abilities were far beyond their expectations. This was a creature at the level of a 4-star threat. Several magical projectiles shot toward the group. Drago managed to block them just in time, while Mifune, still recovering, struggled to get back on his feet. At the same moment, 2 magic circles appeared above Yuzuha. Before she could react, Ness rushed in and pulled her to safety. He looked at her with concern, but she simply smiled and expressed her gratitude. However, Ness remained suspicious, sensing that something was off. Drago, regaining his focus, destroyed another incoming attack. Mien called out to him, signaling that it was time to act. Understanding his intent, Drago's excitement grew. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Meanwhile, Mifune remained focused on his own goals. He cared little about the battle and only thought about stealing more points before escaping. Drago, noticing his actions, turned toward him, already suspecting that he had something planned. Mifune responded with an innocent expression, pretending he had no such intentions, though, in his mind, he was already plotting his next move. Drago, unwilling to let him get away with it, raised his hand, making it clear that he would not allow Mifune to take the points for himself. At the same time, Setsuna fell to one knee, lost in thought. He remembered a past battle, where he had failed to defeat Leo because his strongest attack had not been powerful enough. That failure still weighed heavily on him, reminding him that he needed to refine his techniques further. He recalled a conversation with Lionel, where he had asked for another way to grow stronger. Lionel had simply placed a mysterious bracelet on the table, as if he had known that this moment would come eventually. Setsuna stared at the bracelet, realizing that it might hold the answer he was searching for. Liano explained that the steel hoops were infused with weight magic. Wearing them would gradually improve strength, but they were risky to use, especially for someone not fully recovered. Despite the warning, Setsuna had been training with them ever since. Now, he finally removed the heavy restraints from his arms and legs. As they hit the ground, the sheer weight shattered the floor beneath them. Mifune, watching in shock, could hardly believe it. Meanwhile, the Death King continued his relentless attacks. Drago and Una rushed toward him, enhancing their physical abilities to dodge and counter his strikes. Drago landed a powerful kick to the monster's head, but before he could react, the Death King grabbed his leg. A warning came too late. He needed to focus more on defense. Before the monster could retaliate, Setsuna appeared behind Drago and struck as well. The force of the combined attacks proved overwhelming. The Death King's head separated from his body, signaling his defeat. Both Drago and Setsuna received points, their scores splitting evenly. Mifune was stunned, realizing they had been holding back their full strength until now. Their skill in close combat was unlike anything he had seen before. As Setsuna turned to check on Yuzuha's injuries, he suddenly noticed she was missing. Before they could search for her, the ground beneath Mifune collapsed. Just before he fell, someone caught him, pulling him to safety. Below them, an unsettling sight emerged. A vast number of lifeless bodies scattered across the lower floor. Drago stood frozen in shock. Something was clearly wrong with this dungeon. As monsters rushed toward them, Setsuna quickly ordered everyone to retreat. Despite their efforts, no points were gained from the defeated creatures. Mian realized that the monsters were resurrecting due to dark magic, making it impossible to clear them out. Drago, exhausted, noted that their numbers never seemed to decrease. Setsuna sensed a strong magical presence deep within the dungeon. He was certain of its location, though the source remained unknown. It could even be Yuzuha. Without hesitation, he suggested going down the hole where the monsters were emerging. Mifune hesitated, questioning if he really had to follow them. Staying behind, however, meant certain death. Frustrated, he argued that he had survived so far by strategy. Stealing Drago's points was simply a part of that. But as he turned around, he saw the monsters closing in and had no choice but to run after the group. He couldn't understand how they remained so calm in such a situation. Had they trained in conditions like this before? Drago, still fighting off the creatures, casually pointed out that Mifune was suddenly talking a lot. Mifune replied that it was better than listening to the eerie groans of the undead. Meanwhile, Setsuna focused on something else. He sensed an even stronger magic presence in another direction. Following his lead, they arrived at a new area. A massive, unsettling creature stood before them, an enormous monster with a single eye. Setsuna remained silent for a moment, realizing he had never encountered anything like it before. In most cases, the source of such dark magic would be a magic circle, yet this was different. Mifune, watching closely, understood that they still lacked proper knowledge of the dungeon's layout. If they wanted to survive, he would have to be the one to navigate it. Drago accidentally bumped into Mifune with his elbow, stretching his arms as he prepared for more action. Mifune, holding his nose, warned him not to be too careless. Drago quickly apologized, but before the conversation could continue, Setsuna swiftly eliminated the eye monster, earning 10 points. He turned around to see that the fallen monsters were already reviving. It seemed the creatures had realized their source of magic had been destroyed. With that obstacle gone, they could now focus on gathering enough points to complete their task. Drago, cracking his knuckles, was eager to continue, seeing this as an opportunity for more fun. Mifune, gripping his dagger, silently observed them. He felt they were overconfident, but wasn't worried. If he played it smart, he could collect 100 points and leave without trouble. Before he could act, Setsuna asked about Yuzuha's whereabouts. Caught off guard, Mifune hesitated, sweating slightly. He admitted that he had no idea, perhaps she had been frightened and ran away. However, deep down he wasn't convinced. Thinking back, Yuzuha hadn't shown any fear, even during their battle with the Death King. Something about her behavior didn't add up. Looking at the monstrous remains around them, he realized that these creatures weren't supposed to exist in a low-level dungeon. Doubts crept into his mind. Could the apostles be behind this dark magic? If that was the case, then staying here any longer was dangerous. Not just for him, but for everyone. He could only hope that Layla and the others were safe. Before he could dwell on it further, a large group of undead surged toward them from around the corner. Drago's eyes lit up with excitement. He infused his fists with mana and charged forward, landing powerful blows that shattered the approaching creatures, earning 5 points for each one. Setsuna wielded his mana sword with precision, slashing through the undead with rapid strikes. Mifune, using his dagger, swiftly decapitated his foes. After an intense fight, they had defeated every last monster. Setsuna took a moment to assess the situation, noting that their efforts had earned them a total of 200 points. With his own total at 225, and Drago's at 200, their mission was nearly complete. Mifune, smirking, announced that he had gathered 125 points and was ready to leave. Drago, surprised, asked if he wasn't going to search for Yuzuha. Weren't they friends? Setsuna remained silent, watching Mifune's reaction. Pressing his bracelet, Mifune dismissed the idea. He barely knew Yuzuha, having only met her the day before. She had acted as if they were old acquaintances, which was strange. Most likely she was outside crying in fear. Una, puzzled by his words, repeated the question. Had they really only met yesterday? Without answering, Mifune pressed his bracelet again and turned to leave. Una then suggested they check in the opposite direction. As Mifune attempted to teleport out, he suddenly realized it wasn't working. Panic set in. Something was wrong. Drago, noticing his distress, grew serious. It was possible that the problem lay within their bracelets. Meanwhile, Una sensed something unsettling. a powerful magic source coming from below. Without hesitation, he decided to go search for Yuzuha. He assured the others that he could handle it alone. Mifune, frustrated, questioned if he was serious. Did he really care about Yuzuha that much? Drago, still eager to move forward, encouraged Mifune to go with Una. Setsuna agreed, acknowledging the strong magic coming from beneath them. However, he also warned Una not to act recklessly. If things became too dangerous, he should retreat. Drago acknowledged the request with a nod, but Mifune, growing anxious, pointed upward and insisted that they should report everything to Professor Giovanni first. He couldn't understand why they were so certain Yuzuha was still in the dungeon. However, Setsuna sensed a faint energy, which convinced him that she was nearby. He advised Mifune to go and inform the professor himself, while also telling him to be cautious. Mifune, frustrated, couldn't believe their logic. In his mind, it was far more likely that Yuzuha had already escaped to the surface. Clenching his teeth, he hesitated. The idea of descending deeper into the dungeon was terrifying, but being left alone was even worse. Covering his face with his hands, he regretted how everything had gone wrong. This wasn't how he had planned things. Drago placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, reminding him that they would find Yuzuha and return to the surface together. Reluctantly, Mifune agreed to help, reasoning that searching as a group would be faster and safer. As they descended the staircase, Mian pointed out that neither he nor Drago could sense Yuzuha's mana, so he was curious about how Setsuna had managed to do it. Setsuna calmly responded that it was the result of training. Mifune sighed in disappointment, finding the explanation too simple. Drago suddenly grew alert. The air had become noticeably colder, and even breathing felt different. As they continued through the dungeon, Mifune began hearing strange sounds in the distance. Before he could ask about them, Setsuna raised a hand to signal them to stop. He pointed ahead, sensing something unusual. Drago rushed forward, motioning for the others to follow. As they moved ahead, they finally found Yuzuha. She sat trapped within a magic circle, her body visibly weakened. Veins bulged across her skin. One of her eyes was completely blinded, and her frail hand trembled as she reached out toward them for help. Mifune, confused, struggled to understand what was happening. Drago instinctively moved to help her, but before he could reach her, Setsuna stopped him. He warned that the magic circle was an ancient trap. Scanning the area, he saw no active mechanism, which meant the source could be a cursed object. Remembering a past experience, he recalled someone acquiring a similar item. He doubted that Yuzuha had gotten involved with such magic willingly. Someone else had to be responsible. Una, his expression serious, explained that negating the magic required special techniques, but a magical weapon could break the seal. Turning to Drago, he asked him to trust him with this task. Drago agreed without hesitation. Setsuna gripped his mana sword, murmured an incantation, and then struck the seal beneath Yuzuha. The magic circle shattered instantly. She collapsed forward, falling against his chest, whispering that she couldn't let him go further. He quickly examined her and noticed something unusual. The magic wasn't just surrounding her, it seemed to be coming from within her. Mifune remarked that her current state was the result of reckless actions and wondered what would happen to her now. Una lifted her onto his back, uncertain of the answer but determined to get her to safety. He suspected the apostles were responsible for all of this. Drago turned to Setsuna, saying he had many questions but would wait until they escaped. He then asked Mifune if he could use his bracelet to teleport out. Mifune pressed the mark on his bracelet, but nothing happened. As expected, the teleportation wasn't working. Had Professor Giovanni given them defective equipment? Setsuna examined Yuzuha's hand and confirmed that her bracelet wasn't working either. Drago, now deeply concerned, urged them to move quickly. The ceiling suddenly began to collapse, and Yuan quickly warned everyone that they needed to escape. Drago, with a serious expression, urged them to run as fast as possible. As they moved, rocks started falling around them. Drago smashed the ones in their path with his fists, ensuring a clear way forward. Ian, looking ahead in confusion, struggled to understand what was happening. Just as a pile of rocks crashed down in front of him, Drago immediately shattered them, determined to find a way out. Setsuna soon realized that they were now trapped. The passage behind them had been completely blocked by the falling debris. Drago attempted to clear the rubble, but Setsuna stopped him, telling him not to waste his strength. Instead, they needed to find a safer route. Meanwhile, Layla and her team were searching for survivors. She called out, hoping to hear a response. Suddenly, a weak voice called for help from beneath the rubble. Layla quickly pointed in the direction of the sound and rushed over with her team. Working together, they managed to pull a bald man out from the debris. Layla immediately used healing magic to ease his pain. One of her teammates asked where the others were, and the man replied that one of them was still trapped beyond the rubble. Layla's expression darkened with worry. She could only hope that Setsuna and Drago were still alive. Mifune, frustrated, struck the rubble with his fist, angry that things had turned out this way. Drago turned to Setsuna and asked if he could use his destructive magic to clear the path. Setsuna considered it, but quickly dismissed the idea, fearing that another earthquake could make things even worse. Drago sat on the ground, convinced they would be fine as long as they could clear the blockage. But Setsuna pointed out that the air was already growing thin and everyone was exhausted. They needed to find another way out. After thinking for a moment, Setsuna admitted that there was another exit, but they would have to go even deeper into the dungeon to reach it. He questioned whether they were in any condition to do so. Realizing the risks, he decided to go alone, believing it would be safer for the others to stay behind. Mifune doubted his plan, reminding him that the deeper floors had even stronger monsters. If Setsuna wasn't completely sure of his abilities, it might be better to wait. Setsuna, however, was convinced that the earthquakes were happening because the dungeon boss had awakened. The reason their teleportation wasn't working was likely due to a powerful energy source interfering with it. This dungeon was no longer a simple one-star dungeon. Drago listened carefully, then smirked. It wasn't surprising to hear such a logical explanation from Setsuna. After all, he had survived many dungeons before. Mifune glanced upward and asked if Drago would stay behind and wait for news. Drago agreed, but suggested marking their path in case they needed to find him later. Setsuna nodded seriously, assuring them that he would return with a way to save everyone. As he descended further, he couldn't help but wonder just how powerful the dungeon boss was. The pressure it was exerting on him was immense. If only he had fire or purification magic, dealing with the undead would be much easier. Unfortunately, melee magic lacked elemental properties, making it difficult to handle creatures that thrived on dark energy. After battling countless monsters, Setsuna felt an intense heat burning inside him. Drago was exhausted, and Mifune called out to him. He had once believed that winning the melee competition was just a matter of luck, but now he realized he had been wrong. All this time, while they had been training their bodies, someone had been cheating. Holding a teleportation tag in his hand, Mifune wondered who the real fool was in the end. Drago, despite his exhaustion, reassured him that they would all make it out alive. Suddenly, Layla's voice echoed through the space as she called out for any survivors. Drago perked up and shouted back, letting her know they were still there. One of Layla's teammates, a young man with white hair, confirmed that someone was indeed trapped. Layla pressed her ear to the debris, trying to listen for more voices, and asked about Setsuna. Drago responded loudly, saying that everyone was accounted for except Setsuna, who had gone deeper in search of another exit. Mifune, feeling guilty and drained, apologized for not being able to call out any louder. Layla quickly organized her team to start clearing the rubble. Meanwhile, deeper inside the dungeon, Setsuna could feel the air growing heavier. The presence of the dungeon's core was strong. Ahead, he spotted a passage illuminated by strange lights. It looked like an exit, but it was blocked by a magical barrier. The dungeon boss had awakened. Despite the overwhelming dark energy in the area, the space was eerily empty. He remained on high alert, scanning his surroundings. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared behind him. Sensing the danger, he dodged just in time to avoid an attack. Turning quickly, he was shocked to see a massive two-headed hydra. Its body was damaged, showing signs of forced resurrection. The only ones capable of such a feat were those with the power of an evil god. As he observed the creature, green steam began to rise from its body. Recognizing the poisonous fumes, Setsuna knew he couldn't hesitate. If he didn't defeat the Hydra quickly, the dungeon's condition would deteriorate even further. Taking a deep breath, he prepared to strike. Leaping forward, he swung his magic sword and aimed at one of the Hydra's heads. He remembered from past battles that a Hydra could only be killed by removing all of its heads at once. Cutting just one would be useless. With that in mind, he adjusted his approach, dodging the Hydra's poisonous breath. He noticed his clothing had been partially melted. Had the attack landed directly, he wouldn't have survived. The Hydra's severed head began regenerating, confirming that it had the same ability as the undead. Realizing that single strikes wouldn't work, he needed a way to destroy both heads at the same time. If he had ranged magic, the fight would have been easier. With no other option, he decided to try something new. Summoning his mana, he created a magic sword in his right hand. Then, with a determined expression, he attempted to form another sword in his left. However, the second blade wouldn't materialize. Frustrated, he struggled to understand why it wasn't working. At that moment, he recalled a lesson from Professor Lionel. The professor had once told him that forming two magic weapons at the same time required years of training. Even the most skilled melee mages needed at least 2 decades to master it. An ordinary student's body wasn't strong enough yet, and their mana reserves weren't fully developed. With a calm expression, Lionel had advised him to first focus on controlling his mana within his body. Only then could he advance to dual-wielding magic weapons. Setsuna realized that melee mages had to focus more on controlling the mana within their bodies compared to range mages. Even though he was in an adult's body, he still struggled to fully rely on his past experience. Sitting on his bed, surrounded by a faint blue aura, he reflected on his progress. His ability to control mana had improved significantly during his recovery. Snapping back to the present, he charged toward the Hydra with his magic sword, determined to attack. He hadn't attempted this technique in a long time, but now was the moment to try again. Focusing first on a single sword, he attempted to create a second one. Concentrating the aura in both hands, he slashed at the Hydra, but quickly realized he needed more strength. Before he could react, the Hydra struck him with its tail, sending him crashing into the wall. He struggled to get up, knowing he had used more mana than expected. The Hydra unleashed a stream of poison, forcing him to dodge. His body felt weaker, possibly from the lingering effects of the poison, but he refused to give up. With only one chance left, Setsuna took a deep breath and concentrated. Pushing his limits, he successfully formed 2 mana swords and leaped at the Hydra. Striking multiple times at its necks, he landed just as the creature collapsed. He knew the Hydra wouldn't regenerate if both heads were severed at the same time. Still, he was impressed by how quickly it had recovered during battle. Looking at his injured hands, he knew his dual sword technique was still imperfect. He needed more training to make it stable. Suddenly, a slow clapping sound echoed through the area. Startled, he turned toward the noise. A hooded figure stood there, observing him. The man spoke, impressed that Setsuna had managed to defeat his creation using close combat magic. He mentioned hearing rumors that Setsuna had defeated Leo with a single strike. As the hood shifted, Setsuna's eyes widened in shock. It was Giovanni. Giovanni remained calm and smiled, unfazed by the confrontation. Setsuna, however, remained serious. He had learned to expect the unexpected in situations like this. Giovanni spread his arms and praised Setsuna's intelligence and combat skills. He explained that survival depended on adaptability, especially on the battlefield. Without hesitation, Setsuna demanded answers. He wanted to know if Giovanni was one of the apostles and why he had gone to such lengths. Giovanni, still smiling, admitted that he had been intrigued by Setsuna's performance at the competition. Watching him fight had given him an idea. He wanted Setsuna's body for himself, to turn him into a puppet, just like Yuzua. Hearing this, Setsuna clenched his jaw in anger. Giovanni casually explained that everything had gone according to plan. Yuzua had willingly followed his instructions, never questioning anything, even when he gave her the earring. Mockingly, he said she should be grateful for becoming an undead. She had been nothing more than a foolish pawn. Rage surged through Setsuna as he clenched his fists. He vowed to make Giovanni pay for his actions. Meanwhile, on the surface, the students continued clearing the rubble. Some were exhausted, struggling to move any more debris. Drago, however, pushed forward, finally removing the last stone. A wave of relief washed over him as he stepped out, taking a deep breath. Layla, seeing him free, smiled and expressed her relief. Drago thanked everyone for their efforts, grateful to be out of the dungeon. Looking around, Layla stood on a collapsed rock, reflecting on how deep they had been trapped. The tremors had stopped, and the red glow that once filled the dungeon was beginning to fade. Drago looked up and realized that Setsuna must have defeated the dungeon boss. Mifune checked his bracelet, noticing that it had finally started working. Layla also looked at hers, wondering if it was really over. With a relieved smile, she raised her hand and encouraged everyone to start heading back. The other students cheered in agreement. Drago, wiping sweat from his face, told Layla that he was going to find Setsuna. She placed a hand on her chest, assuring him that she would take care of the others and wait for him outside. Thanking her with a smile, he turned and ran in the opposite direction. Meanwhile, Giovanni adjusted his glasses, challenging Setsuna to make a move. Without hesitation, Setsuna gathered his energy and charged forward, his fist glowing with power. As he swung his attack, Giovanni activated his Ice Phantom technique. Instead of hitting his target, Setsuna struck solid ice. Before he could react, an ice block erupted from the ground, slamming into his face. Giovanni smirked, satisfied with the effectiveness of his technique against melee fighters. He questioned whether Setsuna still believed he could win. Gritting his teeth, Setsuna realized that Giovanni's magic allowed him to set traps and counterattacks efficiently. His only option was to end the fight quickly, but his mana was nearly depleted after battling the boss. Determined, he rushed forward, recognizing that Giovanni was a formation mage like Mifune. Before Giovanni could activate another spell, Setsuna raised his fist, aiming for a direct hit, but Giovanni used Ice Phantom again, dodging the attack. The poison from the Hydra's earlier attack was starting to weaken Setsuna. Suddenly, another ice spike shot up from the ground, piercing his shoulder. With pain spreading through his body, he fell to one knee, pressing his hand to the floor for support. Giovanni walked closer, calling him pathetic and telling him to surrender. Despite his pain, Setsuna refused. He vowed to remove the curse from Yasuha no matter what. Giovanni chuckled and asked if he even knew how to do that. He explained that Yasuha had lured Setsuna into this trap, and making her undead was her reward. Giovanni claimed that he could lift her curse, but only under one condition. Setsuna had to swear loyalty to him. Grabbing Setsuna by the hair, he demanded an answer. Setsuna, still in pain, was confused by the request. Swear loyalty to someone like Giovanni? The thought disgusted him. Summoning the last of his strength, Setsuna gathered mana into his hand and struck. Giovanni activated Ice Phantom again, disappearing just before the hit landed. Setsuna quickly turned his attention to the teleportation circle, predicting where his enemy would reappear. As Giovanni emerged from the magic circle, Setsuna was ready. With precise timing, he swung his mana sword, slicing off Giovanni's arms and head. He thought he had finally won, but to his horror, Giovanni's severed head smiled. Within seconds, his limbs and head regenerated as if nothing had happened. Giovanni laughed, impressed by Setsuna's quick learning, but amused that it still wouldn't be enough. He admitted that he wanted Setsuna for his collection, but he needed him alive for now. Setsuna stared at him, realization dawning. Giovanni was undead. When asked about it, Giovanni proudly confirmed. He explained that when he was on the verge of death, the Great One had granted him immortality. He called himself the ultimate masterpiece. Setsuna, breathing heavily and battered from the fight, wondered if the Great One he spoke of was an evil god. Giovanni observed Setsuna, speaking about how weak and fragile humans were. They aged, grew weaker, and eventually died, a pitiful fate. He wanted to change that by granting immortality to those he deemed worthy. He believed Setsuna had no strength left to continue, and urged him to surrender. Setsuna, struggling to stay conscious, knew he had to find a way out of this. His vision blurred, but he suddenly sensed a familiar presence approaching. He realized help was near. Meanwhile, Giovanni, seeing Setsuna kneeling within the magic circle, assumed he had finally accepted his fate. Without hesitation, Giovanni began chanting in an unfamiliar language, preparing to complete his ritual. Just then, Drago arrived, hurling a rock with all his strength. It struck Giovanni's head, interrupting the spell. Seizing the opportunity, Setsuna launched an attack, his fist aimed at Giovanni's chest. However, Giovanni activated his Ice Phantom skill, causing his body to shatter into icy fragments before the blow could land. As the ice scattered, a massive spike of ice erupted from the ground. Setsuna narrowly evaded it, leaping back just in time. Drago, watching the scene unfold, ran toward Setsuna and asked how he was holding up. Despite his injuries, Setsuna assured him that he could still fight. However, he was more concerned about the others. Drago, slightly out of breath, informed him that Layla and the rest had successfully escaped the dungeon. Hearing this, Setsuna felt relieved, knowing Layla was proving to be more dependable. Giovanni, covering his face with one hand, expressed his irritation at having his ritual interrupted. As he removed his hand, his face was already healing. He had not expected Drago to appear. Looking at him with recognition, Drago was shocked to realize that Giovanni had once been a professor. Setsuna confirmed this, explaining that Giovanni was responsible for everything that had happened. He needed to be stopped immediately. Drago, still in disbelief, questioned how someone like Giovanni had infiltrated their academy. He vowed not to forgive him. Setsuna then analyzed Giovanni's fighting style, explaining that he transformed into ice upon being attacked and countered with ice shards. He also teleported, but there was likely a delay between each use. That was his weakness. A plan was formed. Drago would force Giovanni to teleport, while Setsuna would predict where he would reappear and strike at the right moment. Giovanni's regeneration would slow with repeated damage. Drago acknowledged the plan and charged forward. Giovanni, irritated, touched his still recovering face. Drago attacked again, and once more, Giovanni's body broke into ice fragments, teleporting away. He warned them that his magic was not easy to counter, and that frostbite was unavoidable for anyone attempting to harm him. As soon as Giovanni reappeared, Setsuna was ready. He launched a powerful punch to Giovanni's chest, following up with a rapid series of strikes. Giovanni's body flew backward, crashing into a wall. With bloodied fists, Setsuna watched as Giovanni lay among the rubble, severely injured. Setsuna, exhausted, felt his body reaching its limit. His strength gave out, and he collapsed to the ground. Giovanni, despite his injuries, reached into his head and pulled out an unknown object. A deep purple aura surrounded him. He knew he had no choice but to use the ability granted by the Great One. As the energy surged, he called upon the Hydra, preparing to merge with it. Setsuna remained still, struggling to stay conscious, and warned Drago not to let his guard down. As he looked ahead, he could hardly believe what he was seeing. Giovanni had merged with the Hydra, his body no longer human. Filled with anger, Giovanni blamed them for forcing him to use the mysterious object given to him by the Great One. Drago watched in shock as Giovanni transformed, while Setsuna lay on the ground, realizing that if things continued this way, both of them would be finished. His body refused to move. Suddenly, a fireball appeared in front of him. Confused, he wondered if someone had come to help. He recalled that spiritual power was the fusion of body and spirit. To reach that state, one had to empty their mind and understand true stillness. As the fireball drew closer, he felt something different. It seemed to embody that emptiness he had heard about. He reached out, hoping for strength to save his friends. In that instant, his surroundings changed. He was no longer in the dungeon, but in an unfamiliar space. Looking around, he questioned where he was. The place felt completely different, almost like another dimension. Turning around, he was met with the sight of a powerful fire spirit. The being towered over him, its form massive and radiating heat like a titan. Just standing in its presence filled him with pressure. Realizing what he was facing, Setsuna pleaded for its aid, explaining that the evil god and his followers threatened everything. His friends were in danger and he needed its power to stop them. The spirit, however, dismissed him, finding his request arrogant. Before he could react, his body was lifted into the air and pulled toward the spirit. The heat was overwhelming, forcing him to shield his face with his hands. The spirit, unimpressed, questioned why he cared so much. Without waiting for an answer, it hurled massive rocks at him, crushing his body under their weight. Setsuna struggled against the pressure and asked what the spirit meant. Instead of answering, the spirit intensified the heat, setting the very rocks on fire. Setsuna's entire body felt like it was burning. The spirit seemed amused, declaring that it would turn this place into a fiery hell just to incinerate him completely. As the flames surrounded him, Setsuna realized that one wrong move could end everything. He needed to convince the spirit. The spirit, observing him closely, noted that he was still conscious despite the extreme heat. A normal person would have collapsed long ago. Sensing something unusual, the spirit recognized the presence of another force within Setsuna, the spirit of time. Pushing aside the burning rocks with his hands, Setsuna called out again, determined to make the spirit listen. The spirit grew more frustrated, finding both him and the minions of the evil god equally irritating. This confirmed Setsuna's suspicion. The spirit knew about the evil god's forces. He declared that he was there to destroy them. The spirit, unimpressed, demanded to know what he could possibly do. No matter how hard he fought, the battle would never end. He would simply burn in an eternal flame. Setsuna refused to back down. He shouted that he didn't care how long it took, he would never give up. The spirit finally showed interest and challenged him to prove himself. Without warning, it hurled him and the burning rocks toward the ground. As he fell, Setsuna's breath became shallow, his senses fading. He couldn't let this be the end. His thoughts drifted to Drago, still fighting in the real world. He questioned why he was here, what his purpose was. He couldn't die yet, not until he destroyed the evil god. With his last bit of strength, he placed his hand on the burning rock, begging for its power. He wouldn't let anyone else be lost to the evil god. The spirit, watching him closely, admitted that it was impressed. No one had ever lasted so long in its presence. Recognizing his determination, the spirit made its decision. It looked at Setsuna, who had lost consciousness, and let out a sigh. His body began to fade from the dimension. Before sending him back, the spirit warned him never to speak of it to those bothersome beings. A glowing yellow mark appeared on Setsuna's hand. Back in the real world, Drago was struck by an attack, struggling against the icy force. He realized too late that he hadn't been able to protect himself with his magic. Drago struggled to stay on his feet, his body barely responding after the last attack. Giovanni stood over him, prepared to deliver a final blow. With no strength left to defend himself, Drago thought of his family and their words, reminding him that he was their pride and that his role was to protect others. He had failed to shield his friend. As Giovanni prepared to strike, he suddenly realized that his attack had missed. Looking around in confusion, he noticed a wave of heat approaching. Drago, barely conscious, felt the warmth and turned his gaze forward. Giovanni, equally surprised, saw Setsuna engulfed in flames, his red hair burning like fire itself. Moving with incredible speed, Setsuna left a blazing trail behind him, vanishing from Giovanni's sight for a moment before landing a devastating punch. The impact sent Giovanni crashing into the rocks, unable to comprehend how a close combat fighter was now wielding elemental magic. His wounds were no longer healing as quickly. Looking at his own hand, he saw a new mark, a sign of another power. Fear crept into him as he watched Setsuna walking toward him, flames dancing around him. Desperate, Giovanni gathered energy in his mouth, preparing a powerful poison attack. He unleashed the toxic vortex, confident that no living creature could survive it. But Setsuna easily deflected it, dispersing the poison like it was nothing. Giovanni was stunned. His attack had been negated, and before he could react, Setsuna was already upon him. The next blow ignited flames across his body, but something felt off. His new power wasn't fully under control. Giovanni took advantage of the moment, launching a counterattack while Setsuna struggled. Ice spikes shot toward him, striking his body. Laughing, Giovanni assumed the battle was over. He believed that, while Setsuna's strength was remarkable, he was still just a human fighting against something beyond mortality. He raised his hand to finish him off, only to find it severed. Staring in shock, he saw Layla standing between them, wielding a glowing mana sword. She positioned herself in front of Setsuna. determined to protect him. Giovanni, momentarily distracted by Setsuna, hadn't noticed her arrival. Annoyed, he turned his focus toward her, intending to eliminate her quickly. Layla glanced at Setsuna, who was unconscious, his red hair and flames surrounding him. Something had changed about him. Despite her exhaustion, she resolved to defend him at all costs. Meanwhile, Setsuna found himself once again in an unfamiliar dimension. Confused, he looked around until he spotted the fire spirit observing a rift that revealed the battle outside. The spirit, unimpressed, considered him weak for being consumed by his own flames. Setsuna, trying to understand what was happening, caught sight of Layla fighting Giovanni through the rift. Desperate to return, he turned to the spirit, asking for guidance on controlling his power. The spirit refused to help, leaving him to figure it out on his own. Back in the battle, Layla faced Giovanni head-on. His attack left a cut on her cheek, followed by another strike that shattered her mana sword and wounded her shoulder. The force of the blow sent her flying, landing next to Setsuna's unconscious body. Holding her wound, she clenched her teeth, recalling a lesson from the past. Determination was the key to strength. Even someone like her could grow stronger, as long as she had the will to fight. Giovanni continued his relentless assault, striking Layla repeatedly. She collapsed, blood staining the ground beneath her. As he prepared,